Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Mary Trump Show live stream of today's January 6th Select Committee hearings. They are going to be focusing on the DOJ and Donald's attempts and the attempts of those of his supporters who to manipulate the DOJ or to coerce people in the DOJ to do his bidding. I don't know if I could say I'm looking forward to this. These have been pretty draining, haven't they? But I think this is a very crucial piece of the puzzle. So the more we hear about those manipulations, the better. Of course, this hearing is coming on the heels of another brutal morning, thanks to SCOTUS. They basically eviscerated Miranda rights, which means that the vast majority of people who don't know what their rights are when they get arrested don't have to have them. Uh, Thank goodness we have a recovering lawyer. Hi, Dean.
Hi, I'm a lawyer forever. I will sue somebody. If someone wants me to sue, I'm available for a very small fee. Just follow me on Twitter. I'll file a lawsuit. So
Well, I think, Dean, after Tuesday, I think the idea that everybody on the planet isn't suing Donald and Rudolph Giuliani and John Eastman is kind of beyond the pale.
It is. Well, I think the reason that Shay Moss and her mother, Lady Ruby, didn't sue Donald Trump, just because of the difficulty of suing, he was president when he said it, but she has not-for-profit lawyers who are volunteering, essentially. So they filed a lawsuit against Giuliani, who filed a motion just a few weeks ago to dismiss. We'll see what happens there. But yeah, those two are the real heroes. Mike Pence, no hero. This is ridiculous, isn't it, Mary? This idea. It's like saying someone's a hero because they didn't join a bank robbery. It's like, oh, you didn't join the plot that robbed the bank, you're a hero. You're not a hero. Look, there is a commendableness. You can be commended for doing the right thing, fine, but not a hero.
I mean, I'm glad he did his job for once. That's lovely. But Dean, I think hi, Brian. Hey, just talking about Shay Moss and Lady Ruby and how, Mike Pence did his job once. I'm very glad he did it, but he doesn't have the guts to show up in front of the committee. And by the way, he was doing his job while surrounded by Secret Service agents. Hey, Jen, so good to have you. And we don't have Dean for much time today, so I want to. And again, I know these things are separate, but for those of us lay people, I'm having similar feelings vis-a-vis Supreme Court decisions and these hearings as I have with what DOJ is or is not doing vis-a-vis Donald, because even though everything he's done in the past is irrelevant, just personally, this idea that he has committed so many alleged crimes and has never been held accountable does increase, I think, the country's sense of urgency that he be held accountable, but by what is by far one of his worst crimes. And same thing with SCOTUS. Has nothing to do with this committee. However, the fact that the Supreme Court is trying to take this country back to 1860, I think increases the urgency of what this committee is trying to do, and hopefully increases the pressure on Democrats and the Biden administration to do something. Is that just completely out of bounds?
The urgency to charge Donald Trump builds by the minute, because the level of criminality that we're seeing, the evidence we're seeing, is very clear. And Merrick Garland is an institutionalist. We hear that all the time. Merrick Garland, institutionalist. I don't know if Merrick Garland understands this. The very institutions he's trying to save, their credibility will be destroyed if he doesn't charge Donald Trump, because these institutions only have credibility because we view them as fair, and we view that the rule of law is no one is above it. Doesn't matter Democrat nor Republican. So in the same week of Andrew Gillum charged for crimes in Florida, who was a Democrat, and we know Hunter Biden's being investigated, we want to hear Donald Trump being investigated. I will say, though, today, the breaking news right before we came on, I probably saw Jeffrey Clark, the Trump lawyer who was involved in this scheme we're going to hear more about today. His house was raided by the FBI yesterday. We'll find out more about what they were looking for. But
so sad.
Things are connected. Clearly, it's
a
connected.
big point.
So
yeah,
Dean, that's a huge point. I mean, everyone's been wondering, what's the Department of Justice doing? And the only thing we've heard prior to this was, we're listening. But they raided an apartment, right? They pulled the Michael Cohen treatment. There is an impaneled grand jury somewhere, and
yes,
they're all going to go down.
that's what we hope, right? I mean, the whole idea, we know that it's confirmed there's a grand jury. There's no doubt. They subpoenaed more people yesterday, was the reporting, involving the elector scheme. And today we're going to hear, I was going through it all last night and this morning, all the stuff about, we're going to hear from Jeffrey Rosen, who was acting AG after Bill Barr, then Richard Donahue, one of the top people. Hey, there's Norm. And then Stephen Engel, who was a long-serving Trump justice official there. All of this, though, was to serve the John Eastman plan, the Trump Eastman plan about the elector scheme. It was all building to January 6th and giving a duplicate slate for Mike Pence to go, okay, I'm going to say there's two slates, and either I'm going to recognize only the slates for Trump, or I'm going to delay this, and who knows what happens after that. So it's going to be interesting. But there's a whole other, this level of using the DOJ. They tried a coup in the DOJ. I mean, that's what everyone should think when they hear it today. It was a coup attempt. They were trying to get rid of Jeffrey Rosen and replace him with environmental lawyer from the DOJ, Jeffrey Clark, who drafted a letter off the charts on December 28th. I want to read it again today, that was sending to the officials in Georgia saying, declare a special session. If Brian Kemp won't do it, the governor, you just do it. And I want you to simply declare that the slate of electors that Joe Biden sent in isn't the real one. It's going to be us. And probably one of the most remarkable things we'll hear today is December 27th, the day before, Trump is on the phone with these guys, with Rosen and Donahue, and tells them, just say the election's corrupt and leave the rest to me and my Republican friends.
Are you sure he was on the phone?
He was on the phone. Maybe it was Mary Trump. There was a Trump on the phone. I'm not sure it was Donald or it was Mary. That's going to be remarkable to hear that. Just say the election was corrupt, leave the rest to us. Of course, it conjures up the whole thing with Zelensky in Ukraine. Just open an investigation and leave the rest to us. That's his MO. Your uncle's a
actually, Dean, back up. You're right. It's not open the investigation. It's announce it. It's in front of a microphone, right? It's always the presentation, create doubt, and then the public will buy it. He's not ever trying to persuade a court of law. He was trying to persuade Mike Pence or someone else to just that the public will allow it if they believe the big lie. It's always just, that's it.
It is.
Yeah.
Still doing it.
Look at Norm's backdrop, though. Where are you, Norm? Are you?
I am in Brooklyn, of all places.
Oh.
And I'm in a hotel. We did a program for judges on criminal justice and mental health with a documentary that I spearheaded called The Definition of Insanity. I hope all of you will watch. So this is the backdrop in a hotel room. Exactly what it is, I have no idea, but it beats an unmade bed.
Yeah, probably. It's actually pretty cool.
Just a couple of points to make. One is, remember that while all this was going on with the Justice Department, we were seeing something comparable with the Defense Department. And in this case, it was a success in removing officials who they knew would not cooperate with the plot and installing lickspittles who would. And it had two goals. One was to make sure there was no National Guard sent out at what they knew was going to be a riot at the Capitol, and that the Capitol Police would not be able to stop them from going in and creating mayhem. The second was to make sure that if indeed the mayhem got worse and Pence was hanged and members of Congress were killed, that Trump could declare the use of the Insurrection Act and have an acting Secretary of Defense who would direct the military to support his actions to bring about martial law. So the plot here extends even more widely. The second point is, now that we know that they've raided Jeffrey Clark and taken his devices, although, of course, they took Rudy Giuliani's devices like a year ago. I'm still waiting to see what happens with those. Jeffrey Clark is screwed. And as Mo Brooks was screwed. And my question is, who will be first in line to turn on Donald Trump to save his own ass? And will there be a lot of them in line? Because you got a lot of people who are culpable here. And these are people who are directly in the room with Trump. It's not hearsay about it. And it will build even more evidence about the wide array of illegal and unconstitutional and unconscionable acts that this monster did to try and steal our elections and steal our process. Of course, he now has a Supreme Court aiding and abetting so much of this.
Well, and and also, oddly, a lot of the people who testified, who, if he slithers his way out, they'll vote for him again, which is something I want to talk about later, because it is so important. We understand what that means. Now, obviously, every single one of these hearings is important, and so far, I think, with the exception of the first one, I think, because I think we're all very nervous about it, so we all sort of jumped the gun and judged a little bit too soon. But generally speaking, they've unfolded impeccably. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think one of the reasons today's is important is because it's the first time we're talking about an entire institution. And I'm curious, Norm, I think it would be interesting if they make the connection to the Defense Department. I don't know if they'll find it relevant, but Dean, right? Like we've been talking about individuals. We've been talking, in some ways we've been talking about the institution of the electoral process, but we're talking about an institution within his own, within the executive branch that he was trying. Hey, George.
Hey, Mary.
Welcome. First time. Good to have you. So that this is the first time they're going to lay out just how dangerous that aspect of it is. It's not just a bunch of individual people. It's it's the DOJ from the top down.
Don't bother me, Mary. I'm on the phone.
Who's Mary talking to? Donald Trump?
Put them on hold, please. That's older than mine. That's not fair. All right. Mine's a rotary dial.
What Norm said, though, about Donald being involved, today you're going to hear so much about it. There's no more the buffers like in The Godfather. We had buffers in the Corleone family. Well, they're gone because Trump was panicking. We were getting close to January 6th. And that in the screenplay was the deadline. So this is why Trump is on the phone December 27th directly to Rosen and Donahue going, just say the election's fraud and leave the rest to me. And then you have him meeting January 3rd for 3 hours in the White House. We're going to hear about that today with Rosen and with Engel and with Donahue for 3 hours. And they're essentially, Rosen is saying, if you fire me now to put Clark in, the heads of the DOJ are all going to resign. A 3 hour thing. So there's Donald Trump personally pressuring people. So there's no more plausible deniability. There's no what did he know, what did he not know. Donald Trump was involved in all of this. This was a Donald J. Trump production from beginning to end. And from the bucket of crimes from behind the scenes coup to the bucket of crimes on January 6th, where he called his supporters there. I think January 6th was his backup plan. If the legal coup behind the scenes didn't work, the last hope for him was sending those people down there going, we're going to live with the president for 4 years who didn't win. We're just not going to let that happen. His exact words. There was no way not to let that happen without violence at that time. So
we also know that this didn't start after the election. This was a plot that was moving and in place long before. Trump said, in effect, just as he had in 2016, if I lose, the election is corrupt. And they were planning all of this. He knew full well where it would lead. He tried to make sure that they would limit the amount of voting by mail, but also make sure there was enough of it that there wouldn't be an announcement in many states on election eve, so he could declare that these were illegal votes cast. This is a long-standing plot and not something that came up spontaneously after the election. And it is it's mind-boggling to see how evil everything was.
It is, and in talking about all of this, for a stupid person, he's actually quite wily about certain things. Like he's very good at cheating and setting that up. But I think they're probably starting soon. But George, in listening to these guys talk about the machinations and what was going on, I'm thinking this started with Comey, right? This started when Donald fired Comey for no cause, right? And that's
move out all obstacles, move the obstacles out of the way. and create a pathway, pave a road that is smooth, that is going to be smooth for his bidding. You know what I mean? Didn't he say that he liked it acting people in an acting position because they're more pliable? They want to impress, dear leader. And, there's
and also just quickly, it's a way also to avoid confirmation hearings.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it is, when you think about it in those terms, right? This has been it's probably been going on since 1948, but at least for our purposes, this has been going on since the first time he claimed that the Iowa caucuses were rigged against him because Ted Cruz won.
Right. Think about that word rigged he planted that seed very early on. That word rigged, it's rigged. That's the repetition, introducing that word into the lexicon, into our consciousness very early is very deliberate. Rigged. If it doesn't go my way, it's rigged.
And Dean, we're starting soon, but Jen just reminded us that Stand Back and Stand By was September 2020. So again, it wasn't, that was the first deliberate injection or threat of violence.
And now there's extra security for the January 6th committee members.
The Select Committee to investigate the January 6th
Here we go.
attack on the United States Capitol will be in order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare the committee in recess at any point. Pursuant to House Deposition Authority Regulation 10, the chair announces the committee's approval to release the deposition material presented during today's hearing. Good afternoon. In our previous hearings, the Select Committee showed that then President Trump applied pressure at every level of government, from local election workers up to his own vice president, hoping public servants would give in to that pressure and help him steal an election he actually lost. Today, we'll tell the story of how the pressure campaign also targeted the federal agency charged with enforcement of our laws, the Department of Justice. We already covered part of Mr. Trump's effort. We heard from Attorney General Bill Barr tell the story and the committee about the baseless claims Mr. Trump wanted the Justice Department to investigate, and that Mr. Barr viewed those claims as nonsense. Today, we'll hear from Jeffrey Rosen, the person Mr. Trump appointed to run the Justice Department after Attorney General Barr resigned. We'll hear from other senior Justice Department officials also. Together, these public servants resisted Mr. Trump's effort to misuse the Justice Department as part of his plan to hold on to power. And we will show that Trump's demands that the department investigate baseless claims of election fraud continued into January 2021. But Donald Trump didn't just want the Justice Department to investigate. He wanted the Justice Department to help legitimize his lies, to basically call the election corrupt, to appoint a special counsel to investigate alleged election fraud, to send a letter to 6 state legislatures urging them to consider altering the election results. And when these and other efforts fail, Donald Trump sought to replace Mr. Rosen, the acting Attorney General, with a lawyer who he believed would inappropriately put the full weight of the Justice Department behind the effort to overturn the election. Let's think about what that means. Wherever you live in the United States, there's probably a local government executive, a mayor, or a county commissioner. There's also an official responsible for enforcing the laws, a district attorney or a local prosecutor. Imagine if your mayor lost a re-election bid, but instead of conceding the race, they picked up the phone, called the district attorney, and said, I want you to say this election was stolen. I want you to tell the Board of Elections not to certify the results. That's essentially what Donald Trump was trying to do with the election for president of the United States. It was a brazen attempt to use the Justice Department to advance the president's personal political agenda. Today, my colleague from Illinois, Mr. Kinzinger, and other witnesses will walk through the Select Committee's findings on these matters. But first, I recognize our distinguished Vice Chair, Ms. Cheney of Wyoming, for any opening statement she's care to offer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. At this point, our committee has just begun to show America the evidence that we have gathered. There is much more to come, both in our hearings and in our report. But I'd like to take just a moment to put everything we've seen in context. We have already seen how President Trump falsely declared victory on November 3rd, 2020, how he and his team launched a fraudulent media campaign that persuaded tens of millions of Americans that the election was stolen from him. Donald Trump intentionally ran false ads on television and social media, featuring allegations that his advisors and his Justice Department repeatedly told him were untrue. We have also seen how Donald Trump launched a fraudulent fundraising campaign that raised hundreds of millions of dollars, again, based on those same false election fraud allegations. We have seen how President Trump and his allies corruptly attempted to pressure Vice President Pence to refuse to count lawful electoral votes and obstruct Congress's proceedings on January 6th, and how he provoked a violent mob to pursue the Vice President and others in our Capitol. We've seen how the President oversaw and personally participated in an effort in multiple states to vilify, threaten, and pressure election officials, and to use false allegations to pressure state legislators to change the outcome of the election. We've seen how President Trump worked with and directed the Republican National Committee and others to organize an effort to create fake electoral slates, and later to transmit those materially false documents to federal officials, again, as part of his planning for January 6th. We have seen how President Trump persuaded tens of thousands of his supporters to travel to Washington, D.C. for January 6th. And we will see in far more detail how the president's rally and march to the Capitol were organized and choreographed. As you can tell, these efforts were not some minor or ad hoc enterprise concocted overnight. Each required planning and coordination. Some required significant funding. All of them were overseen by President Trump. And much more information will be presented soon regarding the president's statements and actions on January 6th. Today, as Chairman Thompson indicated, we turn to yet another element of the president's effort to overturn the 2020 election, this one involving the Department of Justice. A key focus of our hearing today will be a draft letter that our witnesses here today refused to sign. This letter was written by Mr. Jeff Clark with another Department of Justice lawyer, Ken Klukowski.
He's having
and
a
the
bad
letter
day.
was to be sent to the leadership of the Georgia State Legislature. Other versions of the letter were intended for other states. Neither Mr. Clark nor Mr. Klukowski had any evidence of widespread election fraud, but they were quite aware of what Mr. Trump wanted the department to do. Jeff Clark met privately with President Trump and others in the White House and agreed to assist the president without telling the senior leadership of the department who oversaw him. As you will see, this letter claims that the U.S. Department of Justice's investigations have, quote, identified significant concerns that may have impacted the outcome of the election in multiple states, including the state of Georgia. In fact, Donald Trump knew this was a lie. The Department of Justice had already informed the President of the United States repeatedly that its investigations had found no fraud sufficient to overturn the results of the 2020 election. The letter also said this, quote, in light of these developments, the department recommends that the Georgia General Assembly should convene in special session end quote, and consider approving a new slate of electors. And it indicates that a separate, quote, fake slate of electors supporting Donald Trump has already been transmitted to Washington, D.C. For those of you who have been watching these hearings, the language of this draft Justice Department letter will sound very familiar. The text is similar to what we have seen from John Eastman and Rudy Giuliani, both of whom were coordinating with President Trump to overturn the 2020 election. When one of our witnesses today, Mr. Donahue, first saw this draft letter, he wrote this, quote, "This would be a grave step for the department to take, and it could have tremendous constitutional, political, and social ramifications for the country," end quote. This committee agrees. Had this letter been released on official Department of Justice letterhead, it would have falsely informed all Americans, including those who might be inclined to come to Washington on January 6th, that President Trump's election fraud allegations were likely very real. Here is another observation about this letter. Look at the signature line. It was written by Jeff Clark and Mr. Kukowski, not just for Clark's signature, but also for our witnesses today, Jeff Rosen and Richard Donahue. When it became clear that neither Mr. Rosen nor Mr. Donahue would sign this letter, President Trump's plan necessarily changed. As you will hear today, Donald Trump offered Mr. Clark the job of acting Attorney General, replacing Mr. Rosen, with the understanding that Clark would send this letter to Georgia and other states and take other actions the president requested. One other point. Millions of Americans have seen the testimony of Attorney General Barr before this committee. At one point in his deposition, the former Attorney General was asked why he authorized the Department of Justice to investigate fraud in the 2020 election at all. Why not just follow the regular course of action and let the investigations occur much later in time, after January 6th? Here's what he said.
Felt the responsible thing to do was to be in a position to have a view as to whether or not there was fraud. And frankly, I think the fact that I put myself in the position that I could say that we had looked at this and didn't think there was fraud was really important to moving things forward. And I sort of shudder to think what the situation would have been if the position of the department was, we're not even looking at this until after Biden's in office. I'm not sure we would have had a transition at all.
I want to thank each of our witnesses before us today for your role in addressing and rebutting the false allegations of fraud at the root of January 6th. And thank you for standing up for the Constitution and for the rule of law.
I still don't get why Barr wasn't all in.
Public officials behaved in the honorable way our witnesses
He's
did.
smarter than Trump.
At the close of today's hearing, we will see video testimony by 3 members of Donald Trump's White House staff. They will identify certain of the members of Congress who contacted the White House after January 6th to seek presidential pardons for their conduct. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Boom.
Without objection, the chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Kinzinger, for an opening statement.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for being here.
I was.
I'd like to start with a personal story. So in May of 2009, I returned from service in Iraq and I announced my intention to run for Congress. A big reason I decided to run for Congress was my motivation to ensure freedom and democracy were defended overseas. I remember making a commitment out loud a few times and in my heart repeatedly, even to today, that if we are going to ask Americans to be willing to die in service to our country, we as leaders must at least be willing to sacrifice our political careers when integrity and our oath requires it. After all, losing a job is nothing compared to losing your life. Within the halls of power, in the face of a president, that commitment can easily be forgotten. Presidential pressure can be really hard to resist. Today, we'll focus on a few officials who stood firm against President Trump's political pressure campaign. When the president tried to misuse the department and install a loyalist at its helm, these brave officials refused and threatened to resign. They were willing to sacrifice their careers for the good of our country. The Department of Justice is unique in the executive branch. The president oversees the Department of Justice, yet the president's personal or partisan interests must not shape or dictate the department's actions. The president cannot and must not use the department to serve his own personal interest, and he must not use its people to do his political bidding, especially when what he wants them to do is to subvert democracy. The president cannot pervert justice nor the law to maintain his power. Justice must, both in fact and law, be blind. That is critical to our whole system of self-governance. During this hearing, you'll hear time and time again about the president's request to investigate claims of widespread fraud. Our witnesses, Mr. Rosen, Mr. Donahue, and Mr. Engel, stood firm in the face of overbearing political pressure because they understood that their oath was to the Constitution and not to the personal or political interests of the president. The president and his allies became keenly aware that with legal challenges exhausted and electoral votes certified, their only hope would be a last-ditch scheme to prevent Congress from certifying the win, thus throwing the entire system into constitutional chaos. The president wanted the department to sow doubt in the legitimacy of the election, to empower his followers and members of Congress to take action. If the department could just lend its credibility to the conspiracies, people would have the justification they needed to spread the big lie. So President Trump ultimately wanted the Department of Justice to say the election was, quote, corrupt and, quote, leave the rest to me and the Republican congressmen. As you will hear today, the department's top leadership refused. Not surprisingly, President Trump didn't take no for an answer. He didn't accept it from Attorney General Barr, and he wouldn't accept it from Mr. Rosen either. So he looked for another Attorney General, his third in 2 weeks. He needed to find someone who was willing to ignore the facts. That is not the norm. Let's look at what attorneys general, Democrats and Republicans alike, have said about upholding their oath to the Constitution.
He said it right, attorneys general.
Attorney General ultimately owes his loyalty to the integrity of the American people and to the fidelity to the Constitution and the legitimate laws of the country.
Says the guy who likes to torture children.
Required to do.
I will be an independent attorney general. I will be the people's lawyer. If, however, there were an issue that I thought were that significant that would compromise my ability to serve as attorney general in the way that I have described, that as the people's lawyer, I would not hesitate to resign.
If they show Barr, I'm falling out of my
chair. The president proposed to undertake a course of conduct that was in violation of the Constitution that would present me with a difficult but not a complex problem. I would have two choices. I could either try to talk him out of it or leave. Those are the choices.
The Attorney General's position as a cabinet member is perhaps unique from all of the cabinet members. Yes, a member of the president's cabinet, but the Attorney General has a unique responsibility to provide independent and objective advice to the president or any agency when it is sought, and sometimes perhaps even when it is not sought.
Everyone in that video, from Eric Holder to Jeff Sessions, spoke as one about the independence of the department.
No Barr.
It's a point of pride at justice to apply the law without the president's political self-interests, tainting its actions or dictating how it uses its authorities. But President Trump did find one candidate at justice who seemed willing to do anything to help him stay in power. Let's hear what President Trump's own lawyer, Eric Hirschman, had to say about Jeff Clark's plan to overturn the election.
By the way, was
I'd like
just
to
rated.
advise viewers, this video contains some strong language.
This will be fun.
And when he finished discussing what he planned on doing, I said, good fucking, excuse me, sorry, a-hole. Congratulations.
He finally
You're
said
the first
it.
step or act you take as Attorney General would be committing a felony and violating Rule 6C. You're clearly the right candidate for this job.
So who's Jeff Clark? An
Beautiful.
environmental lawyer with no experience relevant to leading the entire Department of Justice.
Nicely done.
What was his only qualification? That he would do
The first
whatever the
indictment will be
president
coming
wanted
down
him to do.
shortly.
including overthrowing a free and a fair democratic election. President Trump's campaign to bend the Justice Department to his political will culminated in a showdown on January 3rd. Today, we will take you inside that early evening Oval Office meeting where top Justice Department officials met with the president. At stake, the leadership and integrity of the Department of Justice.
The meeting took about another 2.5 hours from the time I entered. It was entirely focused on whether there should be a DOJ leadership change. I was sitting directly in front of the president. Jeff Rosen was to my right, Jeff Clark was to my left. He looked at me and he underscored, well, the one thing we know is you're not going to do anything. You don't even agree that the concerns that are being presented are valid. And here's someone who has a different view. So well, why shouldn't I do that? You know, that's how the discussion then proceeded.
Jeff Clark was proposing that Jeff Rosen be replaced by Jeff Clark.
Well, of course.
And I thought the proposal was asinine.
What were Clark's purported bases for why it was in the president's interest for him to step in? What would he do? How would things change, according to Mr. Clark in the meeting?
He repeatedly said to the president that if he was put in the seat, he would conduct real investigations that would, in his view, uncover widespread fraud. He would send out the letter that he had drafted, and that this was a last opportunity to sort of set things straight with this defective election, and that he could do it, and he had the intelligence and the will and the desire to pursue these matters in the way that the president thought most appropriate.
And he was making a pitch, and every time he'd get clobbered over the head, he would say, like a call to order, the president's your decision, you get the chance to make this decision, and you've heard everybody and you can make your determination. And then we jump back in and really clobber him.
I made the point that
The
Jeff
wall's still
Clark is not
terrifying.
even competent to serve as the attorney general. He's never been a criminal attorney. He's never conducted a criminal investigation in his life. He's never been in front of a grand jury, much less a trial jury. And he kind of retorted by saying, well, I've done a lot of very complicated appeals and civil litigation, environmental litigation.
What's the over-under
like
on how quickly
and
he
I
gets
said, that's right,
indicted?
you're an environmental lawyer. How about you go back to your office and we'll call you when there's an oil spill. And Pat Cipollone weighed in at one point, I remember saying, that letter that this guy wants to send, that letter is a murder-suicide pact. It's going to damage everyone who touches it.
Wow.
And we should have nothing to do with that letter. I don't ever want to see that letter again.
Wow.
And so we went along those lines.
I thought Jeff's proposal, Clark's proposal, was nuts. I mean, this guy said at a certain point, listen, the best I can tell
There's
is
a guy with a
the
panda
only
and
thing
a
you know
baseball
about
bat.
environmental and elections challenges is they both start with E. And based on your answer tonight, I'm not even certain you know that.
The president said, suppose I do this. Suppose I replace him, Jeff Rosen, with him, Jeff Clark. What do you do?
Well, we know these men before us did the right thing. But think about what happens if these justice officials make a different decision. What happens if they bow to the pressure? What would that do to us as a democracy, as a nation? Imagine a future where the president could screen applicants to the Justice Department with one question. Are you loyal to me or to the Constitution? And it wouldn't take long to find people willing to pledge their loyalty to the man. We know many of President Trump's vocal supporters on January 6th also wanted the Justice Department to do whatever he asked, as long as it meant he could stay in power. They made sure Justice Department officials heard his message as they protested loudly in front of the department on their way to the Capitol on January 6th.
Do your job! Do your job! Do your job! Do your job! Do your job!
Live in D.C., we're we're marching to the Capitol. We are at the Department of Justice right now telling these cowards to do their job. They're going to take the Capitol.
I want to take a moment now to speak directly to my fellow Republicans. Imagine the country's top prosecutor with the power to open investigations, subpoena, charge crimes, and seek imprisonment. Imagine that official pursuing the agenda of the other party instead of that of the American people as a whole. And if you're a Democrat, imagine it the other way around. Today, President Trump's total disregard for the Constitution and his oath will be fully exposed. Now let's get this hearing underway so we can do our part to protect the freedoms that we often take for granted, so that we can see how close we came to losing it all. I now yield back to the chairman.
I love how they're not pulling any punches.
None.
We're joined today
Beautiful.
by three distinguished
We're going for the
witnesses
throat.
who each served in the
I like
Trump
it.
administration in the months preceding January 6th. Mr. Jeffrey Rosen served at the Department of Justice from May 2019 until January 2021. With President Trump's nomination and the confirmation of the United States Senate, he became the United States Deputy Attorney General. In December 2020, he took the mantle of Acting Attorney General. Mr. Richard Donahue has served in the Department of Justice for over 14 years. Mr. Donahue was a United States Attorney for the Eastern District of New York, then became Mr. Rosen's Principal Associate Deputy Attorney General, and finally, Acting Deputy Attorney General. Mr. Donahue also served more than 20 years in the United States military, including the 82nd Airborne and the Judge Advocates General Corps. We are also joined by Mr. Stephen Engel, the former Assistant Attorney General for the Office of Legal Counsel. He was nominated by the former president and confirmed by the Senate during the Trump administration. He served from November 2017 to January 2021 and has now returned to private practice. I will now swear in our witnesses. The witnesses will please stand and raise their right hands. Do you swear unaffirmed under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. You may be seated. Let the record reflect the witnesses all answered in the affirmative. I now recognize myself for questions. First of all, gentlemen, thank you for being here today. All of you served at former President Trump's pleasure at the Department of Justice in top leadership positions with tremendous responsibilities. Former Attorney General Bill Barr told the Select Committee that before he left the department in December 2020, he told President Trump on at least 3 occasions there was no evidence of widespread election fraud that would have changed the results of the presidential election, and refuted numerous specific claims of election fraud the president was making. Mr. Rosen, after Mr. Barr announced his resignation, did Donald Trump continue to demand that the Department of Justice investigate his claims of election fraud?
Yes, he asserted that he thought the Justice Department had not done enough.
Thank you. From the time you took over from Attorney General Barr until January 3rd, how often did President Trump contact you or the department to push allegations of election fraud?
So between December 23rd and January 3rd, the president either called me or met with me virtually every day, with 1 or 2 exceptions like Christmas Day. And before that, because I had been announced that I would become the acting attorney general before the date I actually did, the president had asked that Rich Donahue and I go over and meet with him, I believe on December 15th as well.
So after you had some of these meetings and conversations with the president, what things did the president raise with you?
So the common element of all of this was the president expressing his dissatisfaction that the Justice Department, in his view, had not done enough to investigate election fraud. But at different junctures, other topics came up at different intervals. So at one point, he had raised the question of having a special counsel for election fraud. At a number of points, he raised requests that I meet with his campaign counsel, Mr. Giuliani. At one point, he raised the whether the Justice Department would file a lawsuit in the Supreme Court. At a couple of junctures, there were questions about making public statements or about holding a press conference. One of the later junctures was this issue of sending a letter to state legislatures in Georgia or other states. And so there were different things raised at different parts of, or different intervals, with the common theme being his dissatisfaction about what the Justice Department had done to investigate election fraud. I will say that the Justice Department declined all of those requests that I was just referencing because we did not think that they were appropriate based on the facts and the law as we understood them.
The facts be damned.
Thank you. So, Mr. Donahue, on December 15th, the day after Attorney General Barr announced his resignation, the president summoned you and Mr. Rosen to the White House. At this meeting with the president, what did he want to discuss?
There were a number of topics of discussion that day, Mr. Chairman. Much of the conversation focused on a report that had been recently released relating to Antrim County in Michigan. I believe on December 13th, an organization called the Allied Security Group issued a report that alleged that the Dominion voting machines in that county had a 68% error rate. The report was widely covered in the media. We were aware of it. We obtained a copy of it on the 14th of December, the day prior. We circulated to the U.S. attorneys in Michigan for their awareness. And we had a number of discussions internally, but the conversation with the president on that day, the 15th, was largely focused on that. And he was essentially saying, have you seen this report? He was adamant that the report must be accurate, that it proved that the election was defective, that he in fact won the election, and the department should be using that report to basically tell the American people that the results were not trustworthy. And he went on to other theories as well, but the bulk of that conversation on December 15th focused on Antrim County, Michigan, and the ASOG report.
Thank you. Mr. Engel, we know that Attorney General Barr announced on December 1st, 2020, that the Department of Justice had found no evidence of widespread fraud that could have changed the outcome of the election. So from December 1st, 2020 until today, as you sit here, have you ever doubted that top line conclusion?
No, I've never had any reason to doubt Attorney General Barr's conclusion.
Thank you. Pursuant to Section 5C8 of House Resolution 503, the chair now recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Kinzinger, for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the weeks leading to January 6th, the Department of Justice was fielding almost daily requests from the president to investigate claims of election fraud. Each claim was refuted time and time again, an effort Attorney General Barr described as whack-a-mole. When each of the president's efforts failed, he resorted to installing a new attorney general to say the election was illegal and corrupt, simply so he could stay in power. President Trump started leaning on the Justice Department the first chance he got. On November 29th, his first television interview after the election.
Where is the DOJ and the FBI in all of this, Mr. President? You have laid out some serious charges here. Shouldn't this be something that the FBI is investigating? Are they? Is the DOJ investigating?
missing in action. Can't tell you where they are.
Republican congressmen echoed the president just 2 days later. They wrote a letter to Attorney General Barr laying into the Justice Department for a, quote, shocking lack of action in investigating the claims of election fraud. That same day, Attorney General Barr stated publicly that President Trump's claims had no merit. Ignoring the top law enforcement officer in the country, Republican congressmen amplified the stolen election message to the American public. Let's listen.
And so there's widespread evidence of fraud because people haven't done their jobs.
They're just the worst, stupidest people.
Really?
Will deserve
You always feel like he was
a
the one that was
big
people asking
notation
for
in
call.
history when it's written of the rise and fall of the United States. If they don't clean up this mess, clean
Louis.
up the fraud, do your jobs, and save this little experiment in self-government.
Again,
People
I join
vote
the
for
colleagues in
these
calling
people.
on Attorney
Yeah.
General Barr to
Continuously.
immediately let us know what he's doing.
We're already working on challenging the certified electors. And now what about the courts? How pathetic are the courts?
This is hilarious.
January 6th, I'm joining with the fighters in the Congress,
Oh, hard
and we
buddy
are going
Matt.
to object to electors from states that didn't run clean elections.
Imagine cheering for
Democracy is
him.
left
This.
undefended
He's
if we
a walking
accept the
case of
result
crabs.
Of a stolen election without
the
fighting
worst.
with every bit of
Matt
Hager
Gates
Lincoln
is so
mustard.
juvenile, he Venmoed himself.
Significance is
Jim
January
Jordan.
6th. This is how the process works. The ultimate arbiter here, the ultimate check and balance is the
Whining.
United States Congress. And when
Whining.
something is done in an unconstitutional fashion, which happened in several of these states, we have a duty to step forward and have this debate and have this vote on the 6th
So it was Louis
of January.
Gohmert, Matt Gates, Jim Jordan, who else did they trade?
American patriots start taking
Andy
down
Gibbs.
names.
If
The
Mo
world's
was
smallest violin for Mo Brooks, everyone.
Mr. Donahue, on December 27th, you
So
had a
sad.
90-minute conversation with the president
The
where he
usual band
raised
of
false
idiots.
claim after false claim with you and Mr. Rosen. How did you respond to what you called a, quote, stream of allegations?
The December 27th conversation was, in my mind, an escalation of the earlier conversations. As the former acting AG indicated, there were a lot of communications that preceded that. As we got later in the month of December, the president's entreaties became more urgent. He became more adamant that we weren't doing our job. We need to step up and do our job. And he had this arsenal of allegations that he wanted to rely on. And so I felt in that conversation that was incumbent on me to make it very clear to the president what our investigations had revealed, and that we had concluded, based on actual investigations, actual witness interviews, actual reviews of documents, that these allegations simply had no merit. And I wanted to try to cut through the noise, because it was clear to us that there were a lot of people whispering in his ear, feeding him these conspiracy theories and allegations. And I felt that being very blunt in that conversation might help make it clear to the president these allegations were simply not true. And so as he went through them in what for me was a 90-minute
There's
conversation or
naivete.
so, and what for the former acting AG was a 2-hour conversation, as the president went through them, I went piece by piece to say, no, that's false. That is not true. And to correct him really in a serial fashion as he moved from one theory to another.
Yeah, many more people were telling him the truth.
So one that was very clear at that
and he
point
didn't want to hear it.
was the Antrim County.
So it was
the
naive to
ASOG
think that
report
even
I
being
mentioned
blunt with
earlier.
a guy would help in any form
Allied
or
Security
fashion.
Operations Group
Donald
released this
Trump is
report that said
delusional.
68% error rate. There was, in fact, in Antrim County, a hand recount. Had nothing to do with the department. The department did not request that. That was pursuant to litigation brought by other parties, but there was a hand recount. So they were able to compare the hand recount to what the machines had reported. And for the ballots that were actually counted by the machine, more than 15,000, there was one error, one ballot. And I did a quick calculation and came up with 0.0063% error rate, which is well within tolerance. And so I made it very clear to the president, because he was so fixated on the ASOG report in the December 15th conversation, that in fact, our investigation revealed that the error rate was 0.0063%. So that, Mr. President's example of what people are telling you that is not true and that you cannot and should not be relying on. So that was one very explicit one, and I think you see that reflected in my notes. We went through a series of others. The truck driver who claimed to have moved an entire tractor trailer of ballots from New York to Pennsylvania, that was also incorrect. We did an investigation with the FBI interview witnesses at the front end and the back end of that trailer's transit from New York to Pennsylvania. We looked at loading manifests. We interviewed witnesses, including, of course, the driver, and we knew it wasn't true. Whether the driver believed it or not was never clear to me, but it was just not true. So that was another one that I tried to educate the president on. There were a series of others, mostly in swing states. Of course, he wanted to talk a great deal about Georgia, the State Farm Arena video, which he believed, for various reasons, was, as he said it, fraud staring you right in the face.
Were any of the allegations he brought up found credible? Did you find any of them credible?
No.
So during this conversation, did you take handwritten notes directly quoting the president?
I did, and to make it clear, Attorney General Rosen called me on my government cell phone, said he'd been on the phone with the president for some time. The president had a lot of these allegations. I was better versed in what the department had done just because I had closer contact with the investigations, and the AG asked me to get on the call. Of course, I agreed. And I began taking notes only because at the outset, the president made an allegation I had not heard. I'd heard many of these things. I knew many of them were investigated. But when the president, at least when I came to the conversation, when he began speaking, he brought up an allegation I was completely unaware of. And of course, that concerned us. So I simply reached out and grabbed a notepad off my wife's nightstand and a pen, and I started jotting it down. That had to do with an allegation that more than 200,000 votes were certified in the state of Pennsylvania that were not actually cast. Sometimes the president would say it was 205, sometimes he would say it was 250, but I'd not heard this before, and I want to get the allegation down clearly so that we can look into it if appropriate, and that's why I started taking those notes, and then as the conversation continued, I just continued to take the notes.
Let's take a look at the notes, if we could right now.
Imagine the waste
we
of
can see
resources.
on the screen, you actually quote
tracking this
President
stuff down.
Trump asking
all of these people had to be so
like we heard him
furiously
say in
sick of
his
him.
First television interview. How did you respond to that?
So both the acting AG and I tried to explain to the president on this occasion and on several other occasions that the Justice Department has a very important, very specific, but very limited role in these elections. States run their elections. We are not quality control for the states. We are obviously interested in and have a mission that relates to criminal conduct in relation to federal elections. We also have related civil rights responsibilities. So we do have an important role. But the bottom line was if a state ran their election in such a way that it was defective, that is to the state or Congress to correct. It is not for the Justice Department to step in. And I certainly understood the president as a layman, not understanding why the Justice Department didn't have at least a civil role to step in and bring suit on behalf of the American people. We tried to explain that to him. The American people do not constitute the client for the United States Justice Department. The one and only client of the United States Justice Department is the United States government. And the United States government does not have standing, as we were repeatedly told by our internal teams, OLC led by Steve Engel, as well as the Office of the Solicitor General, researched it and gave us thorough, clear opinions that we simply did not have standing. And we tried to explain that to the president on numerous occasions.
Let's take a look at another one of your notes. You also noted that Mr. Rosen said to Mr. Trump, quote, DOJ can't and won't snap its fingers and change the outcome of the election. How did the president respond to that, sir?
He responded very quickly and said, essentially, that's not what I'm asking you to do. What I'm just asking you to do is just say it was corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republican congressman.
So let's now put up the notes where you quote the president. As you're speaking to that, he said, the president said, just say the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republican congressman.
Wow.
So, Mr. Donahue, that's a direct quote from President Trump, correct?
Boom. That's an exact quote from the president, yes.
The next note shows that even that the president kept pressing, even though he'd been told that there was no evidence
another
of fraud.
smoking gun.
The president keeps saying that the department was, quote, obligated to tell people that this was an illegal, corrupt election.
That's also an exact quote from the president, yes.
Let me just be clear. Did the department find any evidence to conclude that there was anything illegal or corrupt about the 2020 election?
There were isolated instances of fraud. None of them came close to calling into question the outcome of the election in any individual state.
And how would you describe the president's demeanor during that call?
He was more agitated than he was on December 15th. The president throughout all of these meetings and telephone conversations was adamant that he had won and that we were not doing our job. But it did escalate over time until ultimately the meeting on January 3rd, which was sort of the most extreme of the meetings and conversations.
So I want to make sure we don't gloss this over. Just say it was corrupt and leave the rest to us. The president wanted the top Justice Department officials to declare that the election was corrupt, even though, as he knew, there was absolutely no evidence to support that statement. The president didn't care about actually investigating the facts. He just wanted the Department of Justice to put its stamp of approval on the lies. Who was going to help him? Well, Jeff Clark. Mr. Rosen, on Christmas Eve, your first official day as the acting attorney general, President Trump called you. What did he want to talk about?
The same things he was talking about publicly. He wanted to talk about that he thought the election had been stolen or was corrupt, and that there was widespread fraud. And I had told him that our reviews had not shown that to be the case. So we had an extended discussion, probably 15, maybe 20 minutes, something like that. With him urging that the Department of Justice should be doing more with regard to election fraud.
Did he mention Jeff Clark's name?
Yes. It was just in passing. He made what I regarded as a peculiar reference. I don't remember the exact quote, but it was something about, did I know Jeff Clark, or did I know who he was, or something like that. And I told him I did. And then the conversation just moved on. But when I hung up, I was quizzical as to how does the president even know Mr. Clark? I was not aware that they had ever met or that the president had been involved with any of the issues in the civil division.
It was a bit of a surprise when he brought his name up.
Yes.
So Mr. Clark was the acting head of the civil division and head of environmental and natural resources division at the Department of Justice. Do either of those divisions have any role whatsoever in investigating election fraud, sir?
No. And to my awareness, Jeff Clark had no prior involvement of any kind with regard to the work that the department was doing that Attorney General Barr has talked about to this committee.
They were vetting
so let's take
people.
a minute and explain why the president mentioned Jeff Clark's name to Mr. Rosen here on Christmas Eve. On December 21st, some Republican members of Congress met with President Trump in the White House to talk about overturning the 2020 election. Let's hear Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene talk about how this meeting got started.
Do we have to?
I was the only new member at the meeting. I called President Trump on Saturday and said, we've got to have a meeting. There's many of us that feel like this election has been stolen.
So on the screen, you'll see that President Trump's chief
Fuck
of
your
staff,
feelings.
Mark Meadows, tweeted about that meeting.
I gotta go take a
right after
shower.
it happened.
Ow.
He said, quote, several members of Congress
my God.
just finished a meeting in the Oval Office with President Donald Trump, preparing to fight back against mounting evidence of voter fraud. Stay tuned. On the same day he met with these Republican members of Congress, President Trump called into a conservative political convention, and he used the opportunity to pressure the Department of Justice to investigate his bogus claims.
The problem is we need a party that's going to fight, and we have some great congressmen and women that are doing it, and we have some great fighters, but we won this in a landslide. They know it, and we need backing from like the Justice Department and other people have to finally step up?
The Select Committee obtained records from the National Archives that show that Scott Perry was one of the congressmen who joined that meeting. We learned from White House records that you'll now see on the screen that the very next day, Representative Perry returned to the White House. This time he brought a Justice Department official named Jeffrey Clark. Representative Perry provided the following statement to his local TV affiliate. He said, quote, "Throughout the past 4 years, I've worked with Assistant Attorney General Clark on various legislative matters. When President Trump asked if I would make an introduction, I obliged." But why Jeff Clark? Let's hear Mr. Giuliani explain the kind of person that he and the president wanted at the top of justice.
Remember ever recommending to anybody that Mr. Clark, meaning Jeffrey Clark at DOJ, be given election-related responsibilities?
You mean beyond the president?
Correct.
Pull back.
Well, beyond the president, I do recall saying to people that somebody should be put in charge of the Justice Department who isn't frightened of what's to be done to their reputation.
Oh,
Because justice is filled with people like that.
Should put somebody that's not frightened of what's going to be done to their reputation. Mr. Donahue, when you told the president that you would pursue big claims of fraud, was it because you were worried about your reputation?
No, not at all.
Mr. Clark's name was also mentioned in the White House in late December and early January as described by a top aide to Mark Meadows, Cassidy Hutchinson.
Was it your understanding that Representative Perry was pushing for a specific person to take over the department?
He wanted Mr. Jeff Clark to take over the Department of Justice.
Mr. Rosen, after your call with President Trump on December 24th, you spoke with Mr. Clark on December 26th about his contact with the president. Can you tell us about that conversation?
Yes. Because I had been quizzical about why his name had come up, I called him and I tried to explore if he would share if there was something I ought to know. And after some back and forth, he acknowledged that shortly before Christmas, he had gone to a meeting in the Oval Office with the president. That, of course, surprised me. And I asked him, how did that happen? And he was defensive. He said it had been unplanned, that he had been talking to someone he referred to as General Perry, but I believe is Congressman Perry. And that unbeknownst to him, he was asked to go to a meeting and he didn't know it, but it turned out it was at the Oval. He found himself at the Oval Office and he was apologetic for that. And I said,
as
well,
one does.
It wasn't authorized and you didn't even tell me after the fact. You know, this is not appropriate.
Yeah, because that's his
But he
boss.
was contrite and said it had been inadvertent and it would not happen again. And that if anyone asked him to go to such a meeting, he would notify Rich Donahue and me.
Is there a policy that governs who can have contact directly with the White House?
Yes. So across many administrations for a long period of time, there's a policy that, particularly with regard to criminal investigations, restricts at both the White House end and the Justice Department end those more sensitive issues to the highest ranks. So for criminal matters, the policy for a long time has been that only the Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General from the DOJ side can have conversations about criminal matters with the White House, or the Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General can authorize someone for a specific item with their permission, but the idea is to make sure that the top rung of the Justice Department knows about it and is in the thing to control it and make sure only appropriate things are done.
Mr. Ringo, from your perspective, why is it important to have a policy like Mr. Rosen just discussed?
Well, it's critical that the Department of Justice conducts its criminal investigations free from either the reality or any appearance of political interference. And so people can get in trouble if people at the White House are speaking with people at the department. And that's why the purpose of these policies is to keep these communications as infrequent and at the highest levels as possible, just to make sure that people who are less careful about it, who don't really understand these implications, such as Mr. Clark, don't run afoul of those contact policies.
Thank you. So the Select Committee conducted an informal interview with the White House counsel, Pat Cipollone, and his deputy, Pat Philbin, about their contact with Mr. Clark, though neither has yet agreed to sit for transcribed and videotaped interviews. But Pat Cipollone told the Select Committee that he intervened when he heard Mr. Clark was meeting with the president about legal matters without his knowledge, which was strictly against White House policy. Mr. Cipollone and Mr. Philbin, like Mr. Rosen, told Mr. Clark to stand down, and he didn't. On the same day, Acting Attorney General Rosen told Mr. Clark to stop talking to the White House. Representative Perry was urging Chief of Staff Mark Meadows to elevate Clark within the Department of Justice. You can now see on the screen behind me a series of texts between Representative Perry and Mr. Meadows. They show that Representative Perry requested that Mr. Clark be elevated within the department. Representative Perry tells Mr. Meadows on December 26th that, quote, Mark, just checking in as time continues to count down. 11 days to January 6th and 25 days to inauguration. We've got to get going. Representative Perry followed up and says, quote, Mark, you should call Jeff. I just got off the phone with him, and he explained to me why the principal deputy won't work, especially with the FBI. They will view it as not having the authority to enforce what needs to be done. Mr. Meadows responds with, I got it. I think I understand. Let me work on the deputy position. Representative Perry then texts, Roger, just sent you something on Signal. Just sent you an updated file. Did you call Jeff Clark? Mr. Donahue, Representative Perry called you the next day on December 27th. Who told him to call you?
My understanding is the president did at the outset of the call. Congressman Perry told me that he was calling at the behest of the president.
What did he want to talk about?
He wanted to talk about Pennsylvania in particular. He gave me some background about, why he in particular doesn't trust the FBI and why the American people don't necessarily trust the FBI. And then he went into some allegations specific to Pennsylvania, which included, amongst others, this allegation that the Secretary of State had certified more votes than were actually cast.
Did you direct the local U.S. Attorney's Office to investigate that claim?
So Mr. Perry said that he had a great deal of information, that investigations had been done, that there was some sort of forensic type report that would be helpful to me. And I didn't know Congressman Perry. I'd never heard of him before this conversation, but I said, sir, if you've got something that you think is relevant to what the Justice Department's mission is, you should feel free to send it to me. And he did. And I was en route from New York to Washington. I got it. I looked at it on my iPhone. Obviously, I couldn't read the whole thing in transit like that, but I looked at it to get a feel for what it was, and then I forwarded it to the United States Attorney for the Western District of Pennsylvania.
Did they get back to you? What did they conclude?
Scott Brady looked at it. He was the Western District of Pennsylvania U.S. Attorney. Took him a couple of days, but he got back in relatively short order with a pretty clear explanation for why there was no foundation for concern. The Secretary of State had not certified more votes than were actually cast. The difference between the 5.25 that was actually certified by the Secretary of State and the 5 million that was on a public-facing website was that the information on the website was incomplete because 4 counties had not uploaded their data.
So no credibility to that.
There was zero to that, right?
During that call, did Scott Perry mention Mr. Clark, and what did he say about him, if so?
He did. He mentioned Mr. Clark. He said something to the effect of, I think Jeff Clark is great, and I think he's the kind of guy who could get in there and do something about this stuff. And this was coming on the heels of the president having mentioned Mr. Clark in the afternoon call earlier that day.
like to yield to the gentlewoman from Wyoming, Vice Chair Cheney.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kinzinger. I thank the gentleman for yielding. As we discussed earlier, at the center of Mr. Clark's plan to undo President Trump's election loss was a letter. Mr. Donahue, on December 28th, Mr. Clark emailed you and Mr. Rosen a draft letter that he wanted you to sign and send to Georgia state officials. You testified that this could have, quote, grave constitutional consequences. Mr. Donahue, can you tell us what you meant by that?
Well, I had to read both the email and the attached letter twice to make sure I really understood what he was proposing, because it was so extreme to me. I had a hard time getting my head around it initially. But I read it and I did understand it for what he intended. And I had to sit down and sort of compose what I thought was an appropriate response. I actually initially went next door to the acting AG's office, but he was not there. We were both on that email. I knew we would both have probably a very similar reaction to it. He was not in his office, so I returned to my office and I sat down to draft a response because I thought it was very important to give a prompt response rejecting this out of hand. There were, in my response, I explained a number of reasons this is not the department's role to suggest or dictate to state legislatures how they should select their electors. But more importantly, this was not based on fact. This was actually contrary to the facts as developed by department investigations over the last several weeks and months. So I responded to that, and for the department to insert itself into the political process this way, I think would have had grave consequences for the country. It may very well have spiraled us into a constitutional crisis, and I wanted to make sure that he understood the gravity of the situation because he didn't seem to really appreciate it.
And what was Mr. Clark's reaction when you sent this email to him?
He didn't respond directly to the email, but we met shortly after that. After I sent the email, the acting AG returned. I went to his office. He had just read it. He had a very similar reaction to me. He was exasperated, and he told me that he had told one of his administrative assistants to get Jeff Clark up here. We want to talk to him face to face about this. And so the three of us then had a meeting probably around 1800 that night in the Deputy Attorney General's conference room.
And one of the things that you said to Mr. Clark is, quote, what you are doing is nothing less than the United States Justice Department meddling in the outcome of a presidential election. And I assume you conveyed that to him as well in your meeting that evening?
Yes, in those very words. It was a very contentious meeting, but yes, that was said amongst other things.
And despite this contentious meeting and your strong reaction to the letter, did Mr. Clark continue to push his concept in the coming days?
He did, yes. We had subsequent meetings and conversations. The acting AG probably had more contact with him than I did. But between the 28th and the 2nd, when we had another in-person meeting, he clearly continued to move down this path. He began calling witnesses and apparently conducting investigations of his own. He got a briefing from DNI about purported foreign intelligence interference. And we thought perhaps once it was explained to him that there was no basis for that part of his concern, that he would retreat. But instead he doubled down and said, well, okay, so there's no foreign interference. I still think there are enough allegations out there that we should go ahead and send this letter, which shocked me even more than the initial one, because you would think after a couple of days of looking at this, he, like we, would have come to the same conclusion that it was completely unfounded.
Why didn't he get fired?
You learned that he had been calling witnesses and conducting investigations on his own. Did you confront him?
Yes.
And what was his reaction?
Got very defensive. You know, as I said, there were a series of conversations through that week. I certainly remember very specifically the conversation in the meeting on January 2nd. That got even more confrontational, but he was defensive and, you know, similar to his earlier reaction when I said this is nothing less than Justice Department meddling in an election. His reaction was, I think a lot of people have meddled in this election. And so he kind of clung to that and then spewed out some of these theories, some of which we'd heard from the president, but others which were floating around the internet and media, and just kept insisting that the department needed to act and needed to send those letters.
Jeffrey Clark better lawyer up.
has also learned that Mr. Clark was working with another attorney at the department named Ken Kukowski, who drafted this letter to Georgia with Mr. Clark. Mr. Kukowski had arrived at the department on December 15th with just 36 days left until the inauguration.
Do they only take white guys with white shirts?
Under Jeff Clark.
Everyone
and
is?
Mr. Kukowski also worked with
Nothing wrong with white shirts, but I mean,
who we
everyone
showed you at our hearing last week, was one of the primary
I want to
architects
see him in
of
Randy
President
Rainbow
Trump's
Pink.
scheme to overturn the election. The Georgia letter that we've been discussing specifically talks about some of Dr. Eastman's theories, including, quote, the purpose of the special session the department recommends would be for the General Assembly to determine whether the election failed to make a proper and valid choice between the candidates, such that the General Assembly could take whatever action is necessary to ensure that one of the slates of electors cast on December 14th will be accepted by Congress on January 6th.
This is a very methodical deconstruction of
Between
what
Dr.
occurred.
Eastman and Mr. Kukowski
They have
persisted
left
after
no
Mr.
stone
Kukowski
unturned.
joined the Justice Department.
Mm-hmm.
Let's take a look at an email recommending that Mr. Kukowski and Dr. Eastman brief Vice President Pence and his staff. Other recipients of this email included the Chief of Staff to Congressman Louis Gohmert. And the email says, as stated last week, I believe the Vice President and his staff would benefit greatly from a briefing by John and Ken. As I also mentioned, we want to make sure we don't overexpose Ken given his new position. This email suggests that Mr. Kukowski was simultaneously working with Jeffrey Clark to draft the proposed letter to Georgia officials to overturn their certified election, and working with Dr. Eastman to help pressure the Vice President to overturn the election. I want to thank all of our witnesses for being here today and for answering our questions about this letter and other issues. We asked Mr. Clark some of the same questions that we've asked you, and here's how he answered.
Did you discuss this draft letter to Georgia officials with the President of the United States?
Fifth, and executive privilege, again, just restated for the abundance of caution.
Okay, if you look again at the draft letter in the first paragraph, second sentence says, the department will update you as we are able on investigatory progress, but at this time we have identified significant concerns that may have impacted the outcome of the election in multiple states, including the state of Georgia. Isn't that in fact contrary to what Attorney General Barr had said on December 1st, 2020?
Fifth.
Wait, is that a yes?
Pursuant to the order of the committee of today.
He said
Chair
fifth?
declares the committee
Yeah.
recess for a period of approximately 10 minutes.
All right.
Oh my. Where to start? I don't even know where to start.
Start at no evidence. Like over and over again. How many times do we have to hear it? There's no evidence. None. I do have a question though.
Sure. Hey, Dahlia.
With and hi Brian.
Hi.
With his Donald Trump's
Hi, Dahlia.
adamant pursuit of this, was it self-propelled largely, or was it like Giuliani and who else was whispering in his ear that this was fake, you got to go after this, or was it just self-propelled? Was it all him? And if
It's
not,
all-
or if so,
yeah.
It's all him.
Yeah.
It's
no,
all-
no one's
Uncle
telling
Michael
him.
Cohen, nobody does anything under Trump that Trump doesn't want done.
Well,
Right.
what I would say is this is entirely because he's a sore loser and just couldn't grapple with the fact that he not only did he lose, he got trounced, and Republicans outperformed him, which
Unless you wanna
probably
get-
made him insane, right?
Unless you want to get into the nuance that he may, in fact, be $2 billion in debt to Deutsche Bank and already netted 1/8 of that off this lie alone.
John,
Well,
yeah.
listen, he's always going to look for the grift in anything. The silver lining is the grift. But I'm also curious. I don't know that it matters necessarily, but who was coming up with this shit? Because some of it is just insane. Like the 200,000 votes in a suitcase, and there's
That's what I
video,
mean. Like,
and they're
who's
saying the
coming up
video
with
shows.
this?
Well, I think Donald
I don't
Trump
know.
pulled a lot of it out of his ass. I stood there and watched him in
Well,
the
it's
Rose
I was gonna
Garden and in the East Room, and he would pull fat. Nobody's there telling him anything. I remember asking point blank a question one time, and he just looked up to and then came back down and came up with a freaking number that made no sense.
Yeah,
In my experience, that's been Donald Trump. He'll just lie to your face, and he'll figure he can smooth it over later. Well, you know,
Well, he's used to that with wives, children, and underlings. But
But we know
Donahue's
that,
testimony was amazing. Hearing a man tell him no, I think that's a new one for him.
But we know that Rudy Giuliani and Jenna Ellis and Sidney Powell and a bunch of others were sending him all kinds of stuff with these wild ideas. When you saw Rudy the other day say that these two poor women were passing around thumb drives like it was cocaine. That's only one of the many things. And I've got to believe that we're going to find a lot of additional evidence of emails, texts, and the like that were sent to him. And then he just, whatever stuck in his head, he repeated it and exaggerated it and amplified it.
Well, yeah. And Mary, you know this better than any of us here. But Donald Trump is an expert at going after and encouraging the darker side of human nature,
Really?
and so he finds people like Rudy and others who will play to that, and he encourages it. And so, sure, they came up with stuff, but I have to go back to what I know from the White House, and it was what Bill Shine said to me. He goes, "There's no move that's made here that Donald Trump doesn't know about, and we're just here to clean up after the elephant." This is Donald Trump.
What was the admission the other day? We have
no
theories.
evidence.
We just don't have any evidence.
Giuliani said it himself.
So you
Yes.
just go and find the craziest piece of evidence to bolster your theory. I mean,
Give the man what he
it's not
wants,
hard.
Rudy. Give the man what he wants, Rudy.
But
And these guys, these guys said it over and over. These guys said it over and over just now. Like, no evidence. None of this is based on fact. Over and over again. We heard it repeatedly over the last hour.
But the importance of making it clear that people were doing his bidding, not people were convincing him of something, right? Because this is the thing that we're seeing more and more as these hearings unfold. And I don't know if it's because they're just finding their stride or it's because they're getting more evidence, right? We know that they have to add hearings because they have all this evidence pouring in. But these people, as we said at the beginning, they are not pulling punches. And I don't know if I'd ever heard any of the committee members say as explicitly as Liz Cheney did today that Donald Trump was orchestrating all of this in no uncertain terms. There's no equivocation here. And, think about it. He picks people. This always shocks me. There are people in the world weaker than Donald Trump, or people just as craven, like Rudolph Giuliani. So Jeff Clark wasn't a mastermind. He just saw that he could get Donald Trump's attention, and for reasons that beggar the imagination, that's something that he thought was worth having. So he was going to do whatever. I do wonder. I mean, somebody must know this. Why wasn't he fired? Rosa's his boss, and he's basically committing, what's that word? Mutiny or something. That's not the word, but you know what I mean.
Sedition, treason.
No, but like he's not even asking his boss permission. He's going against his boss at every turn, and yet he's still going to the Oval Office. Thank you.
I think there's one interesting element with Jeff Clark that we remain to see. He's fucked.
Is that a legal opinion,
This
Norm?
guy,
in technical
not
terms,
pulling
yeah.
punches.
for a significant jail term, and they're going to try and turn him.
Oh, they'll
And
flip him in a heartbeat.
he was in the room with Donald Trump. He was privy to a whole lot of conversations, very likely that said, we know that this is, he lost, but we're going to find a way around it. And you're the guy who's going to do it. And if he turns on Trump and Mo Brooks turns on Trump, then we go even beyond the smoking guns that we already have. I mean, I think, when Trump says, we don't need you to do anything except, give us the cover to do what we want to do. That to me is a smoking gun. Yep. It's not, he knew what was going on. But you get people who aren't involved in hearsay or where there's no ambiguity turning on him, and the evidence mounts. I don't know how they can avoid prosecuting him if they are able to get even more.
I think they're setting it all up for the prosecution, and the fact that the allegations and the illumination about what Jeffrey Clark did came today after the raid tells you that one thing, that there has been one question that has definitely been answered by today's actions, and that is the Department of Justice has an investigation. They haven't paneled a grand jury. We don't know what the hell they're doing, but Jeffrey Clark, I want the over-under on how quickly he'll be indicted and flip.
Well, can I just jump in on two things? I don't see why Clark would flip if Trump were smart enough to pay him first. But then again, Donald isn't. In other words, if there's a payday waiting for someone, it's only a couple of years in jail.
Wait, when does Donald pay anybody?
That's
Yeah, there you go.
And but as I think the smoking gun point is really important. Some folks on Twitter are responding to my tweet about it, saying we already knew this, but we didn't have someone say it under oath.
That's right.
There's a big difference. And I don't remember the lead-in where he said the Justice Department can't just flip a switch. I don't remember ever hearing that part of it. And again, seeing the contemporaneous notes, hearing it under oath is different than a reporter. I think we just need to say that because I find it so annoying when people say, I already knew this. I'm like, yeah, did you hear Donahue testify under oath? No, you didn't. So
Can I say two things real quick? I think it's really damning for Donald Trump, precisely for the reason that Jen said, that we're having Republicans make the case against Donald Trump for these past 5 hearings, right? These are Republicans. That was Judge Lutig, a conservative. Yesterday was Brad Raffensperger, Secretary of State. Today it was Jeffrey Rosen and Donahue, right, with damning testimony, literally implicating Donald Trump as, like you said, Mary, yesterday, they kept repeating that Donald Trump was intimately involved. That's what they kept saying. Well, today, Liz Cheney said he orchestrated it. And now, point blank, Adam Kinzinger repeated again and again and again the fact that it was all fraud, it was all BS, and nonetheless, he got him on camera saying that Donald Trump said, okay, you just say it's fraud and we'll do the rest. The second point
Go ahead, sorry.
The second point really quick I want to make, which is I think very sobering, that we have a lot to worry about, but just think about it. If the Republicans win again, right? We were so close to a constitutional crisis because if not for Rosen and Donahue, right, who said, this is too much. If say a DeSantis or a Trump comes in and politicizes the Justice Department and puts in an attorney general that is willing to be like Clark and implement the scheme, it's a wrap.
Yes.
Absolutely. Sorry, go ahead, John.
Well, it goes down to the down county stuff too. Bowers, I mean, all the people that the simple fact that you had Moss saying she abandoned her job, and that's not just a telling moment about Trump threatening people and forcing them to leave their jobs. It's a harbinger of doom for the midterm elections. If people as determined as Donald Trump to cheat to win take over those jobs, it's a wrap, Waj.
Yeah, we have a Supreme Court that's going to let them do anything they want.
That's right.
As long as they have guns.
That's a conversation for another time. But yeah, absolutely.
I thought it was amazing that Donahue testified 4 years into the presidency that he had to explain really clearly to the president, who's maybe hearing it for the first time, that the Justice Department doesn't exist to follow him around and empty his ashtrays. Like, really? You're the first guy who told
Barr
him
would
this?
never say that.
Well, I mean, who else was going to? What's his name? Beauregard, or the other guy with the I don't know.
They kept saying there was going to be an
Barr
adult
and-
in the room. There was only an adult film star in the room. Only an adult film star in the room. No adults.
Yeah.
I mean, isn't the bar so low for heroism? If you think about it, these Republicans are such heroes. The fact that they came out now 4 years later and only when compelled under a subpoena are telling the American public everything that they should have said publicly a year and a half ago.
Mm-hmm. I have a question though, and that's been true up until today with anybody who was in the administration, or in Donald's orbit. But can DOJ officials speak out about these things in real time? I mean, I think they could have all resigned and done something, but then that would have put Jeffrey Clark in charge, and that would have had a whole different. So, are they kind of exempt from that charge, even though it applies to pretty
they're
much everybody
notorious
else?
for
Or
not
no?
talking, Mary. In the past, and I've had sources in the DOJ for years, they choose not to protect protect their investigation. They won't even confirm they have them. So for a DOJ member to come out and say these things publicly would be so antithetical to the way the process works inside the DOJ that it would be rare, if ever, it would happen.
Well,
But
also, Merrick
I have a
Garland.
news flash for you. I just got an email from the Trump people replying to the thing today. The golf balls are now half price. So
Oh, fabulous, John. Let's all
You guys,
chip in and buy a bunch.
let's.
I
Anyway.
keep wondering what's going to make
Yay.
Merrick Garland angry enough to tear the tassels off his loafers here. When he was investigating Oklahoma City, when he was investigating the Unabomber, there were no leaks and there were 100% convictions. So, like all of you, I'm tired of assuming he's got this under control, but we saw no accountability for Iran-Contra or the Iraq War, hopefully finally here.
I hope you're right. Part
Thank
two.
you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, around the time Mr. Clark was pushing for the department to send the Georgia letter, the president and his supporters were pressuring the Justice Department to take other actions to change the outcome of the 2020 election. Mr. Engel, you were the head of the Office of Legal Counsel. Can you first off explain your role? What is that?
Sure. One of the Attorney General's most important responsibilities is to provide legal advice to the president and to the executive branch. As a practical matter, given the responsibilities of the Attorney General, the Assistant Attorney General for the Office of Legal Counsel exercises that job on a day-to-day basis. And so, in addition, the head of OLC often functions as a general counsel, essentially to the Attorney General, and so is often, the chief legal advisor to the AG, as well as, the White House and the executive branch more broadly.
So given that role, can you kind of describe your relationship with the president?
Well, in connection with my role at OLC, over the course of my tenure there were a number of instances in which folks at the White House would seek to bring me in to provide legal advice to the president, sometimes discussing the legal options that could be pursued among various policy to reach various policy objectives, sometimes to advise the president that a course of action that they had been discussing was not legally available.
So I want to ask you about two things the president asked you and the department to do. The first is reflected in this email that we're going to put on the screen. The president sent a draft lawsuit to be filed by the department in the Supreme Court. He wanted you, Mr. Rosen, and Mr. Cipollone specifically to review it. You and the department opposed filing it. We see on the screen here that the talking points that you actually drafted on that. So you stated that there is no legal basis to bring this lawsuit. Anyone who thinks otherwise simply doesn't know the law, much less the Supreme Court. Why was this the department's position?
Well, I mean, I think that the memo sort of speaks to this, but essentially this was a draft lawsuit that apparently was prepared by people outside the department. It would be styled as brought by the United States and by the acting Solicitor General as an original jurisdiction matter in the Supreme Court. It was a meritless lawsuit that was not something that the department could or would bring. Somebody obviously prepared it, handed it to the president, and he forwarded it on for our review. But that memo explains why the Department of Justice, as Mr. Donahue said earlier, doesn't have any standing to bring such a lawsuit. The lawsuit would have been untimely. The states had chosen their electors. The electors had been certified. They'd cast their votes. They'd been sent to Washington, D.C. Neither Georgia nor any of the other states on December 28th or whenever this was in a position to change those votes. Essentially, the election had happened. The only thing that hadn't happened was the formal counting of the votes. And so obviously, the person who drafted this lawsuit didn't really understand, in my view, the law and or how the Supreme Court works or the Department of Justice. So it was just not something we were going to do. And the acting Attorney General asked me to prepare a memo with talking points so that he could explain our reasons when he spoke with the president about this.
So would you say it was an unusual request?
It was certainly you said the request that the department file a lawsuit from drafted by outside lawyers was certainly an unusual request.
There was another issue you were asked to look into. In mid-December, did the White House ask Attorney General Barr to consider whether a special counsel could be appointed to look into election fraud issues?
Yes. I mean, I think the president was probably vocal at the time that he believed that special counsel was something that should be considered to look into election fraud. And there is a specific, request where the attorney general sought my legal advice in the middle of December.
And what was your conclusion? What conclusion did you reach?
So this request was whether the attorney general could appoint as a special counsel a state attorney general to conduct an investigation. I mean, as a legal matter, under federal law, the attorney general actually has fairly wide discretion to delegate prosecutorial authority, including to state prosecutors, which happens to assist the department, and not uncommonly, obviously, a state attorney general exercising prosecutorial authority on behalf of the Department of Justice would be fairly uncommon. When we looked at the issue, what we saw is actually that the state law, the state was Louisiana, that the state law precluded the Louisiana Attorney General from accepting any position, any official position on behalf of the United States government. So that answered the question that it was not legally available.
So during your time at the department, was there ever any basis to appoint a special counsel to investigate President Trump's election fraud claims?
Well, neither Attorney General Barr nor Acting Attorney General Rosen did appoint a special counsel. You would appoint a special counsel when the department, when there's a basis for an investigation and the department essentially has a conflict of interest. It's important to get someone who's independent outside the department to handle such an investigation. Neither Attorney General Barr nor Acting Attorney General Rosen ever believed that that was appropriate or necessary in this case.
In fact, Attorney General Barr had already told the president that there was no need for this special counsel. He actually stated that publicly, and we'll see that here in a video from December 21st.
To the extent that there's an investigation, I think that it's being handled responsibly and professionally currently within the department. And to this point, I have not seen a reason to appoint a special counsel, and I have no plan to do so before I leave.
So remember that December 21st was the same day President Trump met with Republican members at the White House to strategize about how to overturn the election, while his attorney general is out telling the public, again, that there was no widespread evidence of election fraud. And yet, 2 days later, we have President Trump tweeting, again publicly pressuring the department to appoint a special counsel. He said, quote, "After seeing the massive voter fraud in the 2020 presidential election, I disagree with anyone that thinks a strong, fast, and fair special counsel is not needed immediately. This was the most corrupt election in the history of our country, and it must be closely examined." The select committees,
and they are, and he did it.
President Trump went as far as to promise the job of special counsel to now discredited former Trump campaign lawyer Sidney Powell at a late night meeting on December 18th.
And then on Friday, he had asked me to be special counsel to address the election issues and to collect evidence. And he was extremely frustrated with the lack of, I would call it, law enforcement by any of the government agencies that are supposed to act to protect the rule of law in our republic.
So let's think here, what would a special counsel do? With only days to go until election certification, it wasn't to investigate anything. An investigation led by a special counsel would just create an illusion of legitimacy and provide fake cover for those who would want to object, including those who stormed the Capitol on January 6th. All of President Trump's plans for the Justice Department were being rebuffed by Mr. Rosen, Mr. Donahue, Mr. Engel, and others. The president became desperate entering into the new year with January 6th fast approaching. President Trump rushed back early from Mar-a-Lago on December 31st and called an emergency meeting with the department's leadership. Here's Mr. Donahue describing the last-minute meeting held at the White House on New Year's Eve.
The president was a little more agitated than he had been on the meeting, in the meeting on the 15th.
He discussed a variety of election matters. He did say, this sounds like the kind of thing that would warrant appointment of a special counsel. There was a point at which the president said something about, why don't you guys seize machines?
Mr. Rosen, the president asked you to seize voting machines from state governments. What was your response to that request?
We had seen nothing improper with regard to the voting machines, and I told them that the real experts at that had been at DHS, and they had briefed us that they had looked at it and that there was nothing wrong with the voting machines. And so that was not something that was appropriate to do.
There would be no factual basis to seize machines. Mr. Donahue,
I don't think there was legal authority either.
Yeah, Mr. Donahue, can you explain what the president did after he was told that the Justice Department?
Hello.
Let's watch book notes instead. There we go.
Homeland Security has expertise in machines and certifying them and making sure that the states are operating them properly. And since DHS had been mentioned, the president yelled out to his secretary, get Ken Cuccinelli on the phone. And she did in very short order. Mr. Cuccinelli was on the phone. He was the number 2 at DHS at the time. I was on the speakerphone. And the president essentially said, Ken, I'm sitting here with the acting attorney general. He just told me it's your job to seize machines and you're not doing your job. And Mr. Cuccinelli responded.
Mr. Rosa, did you ever tell the president that the Department of Homeland Security could seize voting machines?
No, certainly not.
Mr. Donahue, during this meeting, did the president tell you that he would remove you and Mr. Rosen because you weren't declaring there was election fraud?
Toward the end of the meeting, the president, again, was getting very agitated. And he said, people tell me I should just get rid of both of you. I should just remove you and make a change in the leadership, put Jeff Clark in, maybe something will finally get done. And I responded, as I think I had earlier in the December 27th call, Mr. President, you should have the leadership that you want, but understand, the United States Justice Department functions on facts, evidence, and law, and those are not going to change. So you can have whatever leadership you want.
Facts, evidence, and law, and
position is
that's not going to change.
The president's White House counsel, Pat Cipollone, was also present. Do you remember what his position was?
Pat was very supportive. Pat Cipollone, throughout these conversations, was extremely supportive of the Justice Department. He was consistent. I think he had an impossible job at that point, but he did it well, and he always sided with the Justice Department in these discussions.
So let's pause for a second.
Yes,
It's New Year's Eve.
my press pass,
President
Cipollone
Trump
was one of
was
the biggest
talking about
chief
seizing
architects
voting
behind-
machines and making the same demands that had already been shot down by former Attorney General Barr on at least 3 occasions and by Mr. Rosen and Mr. Donahue on multiple other occasions. Claim after claim knocked down, but the president didn't care. The next day, Chief of Staff Mark Meadows sent a flurry of emails to you, Mr. Rosen, asking that the department look into a new set of allegations. We're going to put those emails here on the screen. Here we see 3 requests made on January 1st. One email is a request from Mr. Meadows to you, Mr. Rosen, to send Jeff Clark to Fulton County. What did you do with this request?
Well, really nothing. Certainly didn't send Mr. Clark to Fulton County, but that email was the first corroboration I had seen of Mr. Clark had told me at that point that the president was considering making the change by Monday, January 4th. So Mr. Meadows' email was something of a corroboration that there were discussions going on that I had been not been informed about by Mr. Clark or anybody else.
Interesting. The second request that you have is to have the Department of Justice lawyers investigate allegations of fraud related to New Mexico. Mr. Rosen, did you have concern about these emails?
Yes, really 2 concerns about that one. One was that it was coming from a campaign or political party, And it was really not our role to function as you know, an arm of any campaign for any party or any campaign. That wasn't our role. And that's part of why I had been unwilling to meet with Mr. Giuliani or any of the campaign people before. And the other part was, it was another one of these ones where lots of work had already been done, and I thought it was a rehash of things that had been debunked previously.
So the final email here included a completely baseless conspiracy theory that an Italian defense contractor uploaded software to a satellite that switched votes from Trump to Biden. The Select Committee investigation found that this wild, baseless conspiracy theory made it from the recesses of the internet to the highest echelons of our government. On December 31st, Mr. Meadows received this internet conspiracy theory from Representative Perry. On the screen now is the text that Representative Perry sent to Mr. Meadows, copying a YouTube link with the message, quote, "Why can't we just work with the Italian government?" The next day, the president's chief of staff sent the YouTube link to Mr. Rosen, who forwarded it to Mr. Donahue. Mr. Donahue, did you watch this video?
I did, Congressman.
How long was the video?
Approximately 20 minutes.
Let's just take a look at an excerpt of that video, if we may.
What's being said out of Rome, out of Italy, is that this was done in the U.S. Embassy. That there was a certain State Department guy whose name I don't know yet. I guess this is probably going to come out in Italy at some point. And he was the mastermind, not the mastermind, but anyway, the guy running the operation of changing the votes. And that he was doing this in conjunction with some support from MI6, the CIA, and this Leonardo group.
Mr. Donahue, what was your reaction when you watched that entire 20-minute video?
I emailed the acting attorney general and I said pure insanity, which was my impression of
pure insanity
video, which was patently absurd.
That's funny. Michigan has motto is pure Michigan.
You were asked by
Pure
Mr. Meadows
insanity.
to meet with Mr. Johnson,
Or
who
in
was
Yiddish, pure
in that
Michigan.
video. What was your reaction to that request?
So ordinarily, I'd get an email like this and there was no phone call. It would just, you know, come over the transom. But this one, he called me, Mr. Meadows, and asked me to meet with Mr. Johnson. And I told him this whole thing about Italy had been debunked, and that should be the end of that. And I certainly wasn't going to meet with this person. And he initially seemed to accept
sounds like
that.
the interactions they had with
He said,
Zelensky in
"Well,
Ukraine
why
that
won't
led
you meet
to
with
the
him?"
first.
Because he has real evidence.
I don't
This
think
video
Trump
doesn't
learns
show.
his lesson.
You can walk into an FBI field office anywhere in the United States. There's 55 of them. And he said, okay. But then he called me back a few minutes later and complained and said, I didn't tell you, but this fellow Johnson is working with Rudy Giuliani, and Mr. Giuliani is really offended that you think they have to go to a FBI field office. That's insulting. So couldn't you just have the FBI or you meet with these guys? And by then I was somewhat agitated and told them that there was no way on earth that I was going to do that. I wasn't going to meet with Mr. Johnson. I certainly wasn't going to meet with Mr. Giuliani. I'd made that clear repeatedly, and said that's the end of that. You know, don't raise this with me again. And so, because Mr. Donahue and I had been exchanging our views about this, I think it was 7:13 on a Friday night of New Year's Day. I had run out of patience, and I sent the email that you're talking about, where I made pretty clear that I had no interest in doing anything further with this.
Just to button this up, Mr. Donahue, did you receive a follow-up call from a Department of Defense official about this conspiracy?
I did. I believe it was that same day.
Can you give details on that at all?
I received a telephone call from Kash Patel, who I know was a DOD official at that time, worked for, I believe, Acting Secretary of Defense Miller, and he didn't know much about it. He basically said, do you know anything about this Italy thing and what this is all about? And I informed him that the chief of staff had raised the issue with us in his office on December 29th, that we had looked into it a little bit. We had run the name that was provided to us by the chief of staff. I learned that that individual was in custody in Italy. He had been arrested for a cyber offense of some sort in Italy. The allegation was that he had been exfiltrating data from his company. He was either an employee or a contractor of that company, and he was in custody. That the whole thing was very, very murky at best, and the video was absurd. But that we, the department, were not going to have anything to do with it, and DOD should make up its own mind as to what they're going to do. But I made it clear to him that I didn't think it was anything worth pursuing.
She called the video absurd, and despite the absurdity of that conspiracy theory, we learned that Mr. Meadows discussed it frequently in the White House. And Mr. Meadows didn't let the matter go. The request went from the Department of Justice to the Secretary of Defense, Christopher Miller. As you'll hear, Secretary Miller actually reached out to a high-ranking official based in Italy to follow up on this claim.
The ask for him was, can you call out the defense attaché Rome and find out what the heck's going on, because I'm getting all these weird, crazy reports, and probably the guy on the ground knows more than anything.
The Select Committee confirmed that a call was actually placed by Secretary Miller to the attaché in Italy to investigate the claim that Italian satellites were switching votes from Trump to Biden. This is one of the best examples of the lengths to which the President Trump would go to stay in power. Scouring the internet to support his conspiracy theories shown here.
You almost said conspiracy shit.
In that December 27th call, quote,
Wish he
"You
had.
guys may not be following the internet the way I do." President Trump's efforts to this point had failed. Stonewalled by Mr. Rosen and Mr. Donahue, President Trump had only one option. He needed to make Clark acting attorney general. Mr. Rosen, during a January 2nd meeting with Mr. Clark, did you confront him again about his contact with the president? And if so, can you describe that?
I'm just shocked that Italy had working satellites.
At this point, Mr. Clark had told us that the president had asked him to consider whether he would be willing to replace me, supposedly on a timetable by Monday, the 4th. And so I had told Mr. Clark I thought he was making a colossal error in judgment, but I also hoped to persuade him to be more rational and to understood what we had understood, that there's not a factual basis for the fraud assertions that are being made. So at this meeting, Mr. Donahue and I met with Mr. Clark, and I guess my hopes were disappointed in that Mr. Clark continued to express the view that he thought there was fraud, even though he had not been a participant in the department's review of that, and that he was dissatisfied that we knew what we were doing. So, but he had acknowledged that he had had further, I don't know if it was meeting or phone calls or what, but further discussion with the president, despite having, a week earlier said that if he wouldn't do that, and if he did, if he got an invitation to do that, he would let Rich Donahue or me know. So it was a contentious meeting where we were chastising him that he was insubordinate, he was out of line, he had not honored his own representations of what he would do. And he raised again that he thought that letter should go out, and we were not receptive to that.
Did he tell you in that the president had offered him the job of acting attorney general?
That was a day later. On the 2nd, he said that the president had asked him to let him know if he'd be willing to take it. Subsequently, he told me that on Sunday the 3rd, he told me that the timeline had moved up and that the president had offered him the job and that he was accepting it.
Well, let's ask about that. What was your reaction to that?
Well, on the one hand, I wasn't going to accept being fired by my subordinate, so I wanted to talk to the president directly. With regard to the reason for that is I wanted to try to convince the president not to go down the wrong path that Mr. Clark seemed to be advocating. And it wasn't about me. There's only 17 days left in the administration at that point. I would have been perfectly content to have either of the gentlemen on my left or right replace me if anybody wanted to do that. But I did not want for the Department of Justice to be put in a posture where it would be doing things that were not consistent with the truth, were not consistent with its own appropriate role, or were not consistent with the Constitution. So I did 4 things as soon as Mr. Clark left my office on that Sunday, the 3rd. Number 1, I called Mark Meadows and said, I need to see the president right away. He was agreeable and set up a meeting for 6:15 that Sunday, so about 2 hours away. 2, I called Pat Cipollone, the White House counsel, told him what was going on, and he said he would go into the White House to make sure he was at the meeting and he would be supporting the Justice Department's position as he had been doing consistently. 3, called Steve Engel, who was, I was at the department, it was a Sunday, but there had been some reasons I needed to be there. Mr. Engel, I called at home and asked him if he would come in and go to the meeting, which he did. It proved to be quite helpful. And then number 4, I asked Rich Donahue and Pat Hovakimian, who had previously been my chief of staff, to get the department's senior leadership on a call and let them know what was going on, and which they did. And then Eric Hirschman called me to tell me that he was going to go to the meeting and that he would be supporting the Department of Justice position as well. So I knew.
I just want to let you know, you guys fixed my car, but I can't pick it up until tomorrow morning or early afternoon. Is that okay?
Supportive of the Department of Justice's approach and not supportive of Mr. Clark's approach.
Did Mr. Clark ask you to continue to stay at the department?
At that Sunday meeting, when he told me that he would be replacing me, he said that he had asked to see me alone because usually he had met with me and Mr. Donahue, because he thought it would be appropriate in light of what was happening to at least offer me that I could stay on as his deputy. I thought that was preposterous. Told him that was
oh my God,
nonsensical, and that there's no universe where I was going to do that, to stay on and
he's Donald's mini-me.
Doing things that were not consistent with what I thought should be done. So I didn't accept that offer, if I can put it that way.
And during that meeting, did Mr. Clark ask you to sign the Georgia letter?
That was on the Saturday meeting, January 2nd, that Mr. Donahue and I had with him. He again raised with both of us that he wanted us to both to sign that letter, actually.
So in that meeting, did Mr. Clark say he would turn down the president's offer if you reversed your position and signed the letter?
Yes.
Did Mr. Clark, so you still refused to sign and send that
That
letter?
sounds like bribery.
Yeah, there's a word for that.
Hello.
Both. Very consistent that there was no way we were going to
I
sign that
would
letter.
not be surprised if they already have an indictment.
What Mr. Clark's, proposition was in terms of his own activities. We were not going to sign that letter as long as we were in charge of justice.
DOJ tends to come down rather quickly on.
Thank you for that, by the way.
warrants,
Mr. Donahue, were you
actions by attorneys
to have to attend a meeting at the White House on
inside the
Sunday,
DOJ.
January 3rd?
No, as the acting AG indicated, we had a meeting that afternoon that related to preparations for January 6th. So I was at the department, but I had no expectation of leaving the department. It was a Sunday afternoon, and I was there in civilian clothes, as we both were, and expected to have that meeting, do some other work, but I had no expectation of going to the White House that day.
So let's ask, so prior to that Oval Office meeting, did you set up a conference call with senior leadership at the department? And if so, tell us about that call.
Yes, so obviously it was a bit of a scramble that afternoon to prepare for the Oval Office meeting. We had discussed on several occasions, the acting attorney general and I, whether we should expand the circle of people who knew what was going on. It was very important that Steve Engel know, and that's why I reached out to Steve on December 28th, because if Mr. Rosen were removed from the seat and the president did not immediately appoint someone else to serve as attorney general, just by function of the department's chain of succession, Mr. Engel would be in the seat. We wanted to make sure he knew what was going on should that occur. So The three of us knew. We also brought Pat Hovakimian in, so the four of us knew. But no one else, aside from Jeff Clark, of course, knew what was going on until late that Sunday afternoon. We chose to keep a close hold because we didn't want to create concern or panic in the Justice Department leadership. But at this point, I asked the acting AG, what else can I do to help prepare for this meeting at the Oval Office? And he said, you and Pat should get the AAGs on the phone, and it's time to let them know what's going on. Let's find out what they may do if there's a change in leadership, because that will help inform the conversation at the Oval Office. Pat Hovakimian subsequently set up that meeting. We got most, not all, but most of the AAGs on the phone. We very quickly explained to them what the situation was. I told them, I don't need an answer from you right now. I don't need an answer in this phone call, but if you have an answer, I need it in the next few minutes. So call me, email me, text me, whatever it is. If you know what you would do if Jeff Clark is put in charge of the department. And immediately Eric Dryben, who was the AAG of the Civil Rights Division, said, I don't need to think about it. There's no way I'm staying. And then the other AAGs began to chime in turn, and all essentially said they would leave. They would resign in mass.
There's a vote of confidence for you.
The department leadership.
Incredible. I'd like to look at the Assistant Attorney General on the screen. If we can pull that up, have their pictures. Did every Assistant Attorney General you spoke to, as you said, agree to resign?
Macon Delrahim was not on the call only because we had some difficulty reaching him. But yes, the other people on the screen were on the call, and all without hesitation said that they would resign.
So as part of the Select Committee's investigation, we found that while Mr. Rosen, Mr. Donahue, and Mr. Engel were preparing for their meeting at the White House, Jeff Clark and the president were in constant communication beginning at 7 a.m. White House call logs obtained by the committee show that by 4:19 p.m. on January 3rd, the White House had already begun referring to Mr. Clark as the acting attorney general.
Wow.
As far as the White House was
Damn.
concerned, Mr. Clark was already at the top of the Justice Department. 2 hours later, DOJ leadership arrived at the White House. The Select Committee interviewed every person who was inside the room during this Sunday evening Oval Office meeting. Mr.
I'm glad I
Cipollone
can still be shocked.
was, quote, unmistakably angry during the meeting, and that he, along with Eric Hirschman and Mr. Donahue, quote, forcefully challenged Mr. Clark to produce evidence of his election fraud theories. Mr. Rosen, can you describe how that meeting started?
Yes. So after some preliminaries, so Mr. Meadows had ushered us all in, and then he left. So Mr. Cipollone did some introductions and things. So after some preliminaries, the president turned to me and he said, well, one thing we know is you, Rosen, you aren't going to do anything. You don't even agree with the claims of election fraud. And this other guy at least might do something. And then I said, well, Mr. President, you're right that I'm not going to allow the Justice Department to do anything to try to overturn the election. That's true. But the reason for that is because that's what's consistent with the facts and the law. And that's what's required under the Constitution. So that's the right answer and a good thing for the country. And therefore, I submit it's the right thing for you, Mr. President. And that kicked off another 2 hours of discussion in which everyone in the room was in one way or another making different points, but supportive of my approach for the Justice Department and critical of Mr. Clark.
So at some point, Mr. Donahue comes in the room. Can you explain what led to him?
I want to hear what Donald said.
I forgot about that. So initially,
just say it's corrupt. We'll take it from there.
Underdressed. We had not arranged. We had not yet told the
And
president.
probably, fuck you.
Yeah.
The White House had a list of who would be there. That did include Mr. Engel and the White House counsel and the Deputy White House counsel, Mr. Hirschman. We went in and then we told the president, maybe 10 minutes into the meeting or something, I forget how far in, Mr. Donahue was outside And he said, well, bring him in. And then Mr. Donahue came in and joined the meeting.
So, Mr. Donahue, you enter that room. Can you set the scene for us and describe the tone you walked into?
Yes, but if I could just back up one moment, Congressman, because you put the pictures up on the screen of the AAGs. I just want to make clear, one of the AAGs who was not on the screen was John Demers. John was the National Security Division AAG. John was on the call, but I prefaced the call by saying, John, we need you to stay in place. National security is too important. We need to minimize the disruption. Whether you resign is entirely up to you, obviously, and we'll respect your decision either way, but I'm asking you, please stay in place. And he did. So I don't want to leave the impression that he was not willing to resign, because I think he was.
Thank you for
So with regard to entering the Oval Office, I was sitting in the hallway. An administrative assistant passed by. She asked me, are you supposed to be in this meeting with the president? I said, no, I'm simply here in case questions come up that other people don't have the answer to. And she walked away and then came back probably 30 seconds later and said, the president wants you in the meeting. I proceeded into the Oval Office.
That was a mistake for him.
Probably 2 or 3 steps in, and I stopped because I was, as the AG said, not exactly properly attired. I was wearing jeans and muddy boots and an Army t-shirt, and I never would arrive in the Oval Office this way. I said, Mr. President, I apologize. I'm sorry. I didn't know I was going to be here. And he said, no, just come in. And so I went in. I attempted to take a seat on one of the couches that are behind the chairs arrayed in front of the president's desk. And he said, oh, no, you're going to be up here. And everyone kind of laughed. And they moved the chairs a little bit. Someone from the White House counsel's office picked up a spare chair and put it directly in front of the president. And I took that seat.
Was there discussion about Mr. Clark? Can you kind of enlighten some of what that discussion was?
Yes. So the conversation at this point had moved beyond the specific allegations, whether it was State Farm Arena or Antrim County or Pennsylvania or whatever. We had discussed those repeatedly, and that was backdrop to the conversation. But the conversation at this point was really about whether the president should remove Jeff Rosen and replace him with Jeff Clark. And everyone in the room, I think, understood that that meant that letter would go out. So that was the focus. It was about a 2.5-hour meeting after I entered. And so there were discussions about the pros and cons of doing that. Early on, the president said, what do I have to lose? And it was actually a good opening, because I said, Mr. President, you have a great deal to lose. And I began to explain to him what he had to lose, and what the country had to lose, and what the department had to lose. And this was not in anyone's best interest. That conversation went on for some time. Everyone essentially chimed in with their own thoughts, all of which were consistent about how damaging this would be to the country, to the department, to the administration, to him personally. And at some point, the conversation turned to whether Jeff Clark was even qualified, competent to run the Justice Department, which in my mind, he clearly was not.
Not a requirement.
It was a heated conversation. I thought it was useful to point out to the president that Jeff Clark simply didn't have the skills, the ability, and the experience to run the department. And so I said, Mr. President, you're talking about putting a man in that seat who has never tried a criminal case, who's never conducted a criminal investigation. He's telling you that he's going to take charge of the department, 115,000 employees, including the entire FBI, and turn the place on a dime and conduct nationwide criminal investigations that will produce results in a matter of days. It's impossible. It's absurd. It's not going to happen, and it's going to fail. He has never been in front of a trial jury, a grand jury. He's never even been to Chris Wray's office. I said at one point, if you walked into Chris Wray's office, 1, would you know how to get there? And 2, if you got there, would he even know who you are? Do you really think that the FBI is going to suddenly start following your orders? It's not going to happen. He's not competent. And that's the point at which Mr. Clark tried to defend himself by saying, well, I've been involved in very significant civil and environmental litigation. I've argued many appeals in public courts and things of that nature.
Neat. Wow. Neat.
I will predict that this man will be called at the criminal trial for Jeffrey.
The United States Justice Department.
Did anybody in there support Mr. Clark?
No one.
It was you he was going to replace. So what was your view about the president's plan to appoint Mr. Clark?
Well, as I alluded to earlier, the issue really wasn't about me. It would have been fine, as I said, to have had Rich Donahue replace me. I would have said, great, I get 17 days vacation or something.
Right.
The issue was the use of the Justice Department. And it's just so important that the Justice Department adhere to the facts and the law. That's what it's there to do. And that's what our constitutional role was. And so if the Justice Department gets out of the role that it's supposed to play, that's really bad for our country. And I don't know of a simpler way to say that. And when you damage our fundamental institutions, it's not easy to repair them. So I thought this was a really important issue to try to make sure that the Justice Department was able to stay on the right course.
Mr. Donahue, did you eventually tell the president that mass resignations would occur if he installed Mr. Clark and what the consequences would be?
Yes. So this was in line with the president saying, what do I have to lose? Along those lines, he said, so suppose I do this. So suppose I replace him, Jeff Rosen, with him, Jeff Clark. What would you do? And I said, Mr. President, I would resign immediately. I'm not working 1 minute for this guy, who I had just declared was completely incompetent. And so, the president immediately turned to Mr.
I just declared
said, Steve, you
completely
wouldn't resign, would you? And he said, absolutely, I would, Mr. President. You leave me no choice. And then I said, and we're not the only ones. No one cares if we resign. If Steve and I go, that's fine. It doesn't matter. But I'm telling you what's going to happen. You're going to lose your entire department leadership. Every single AAG will walk out on your entire department leadership will walk out within hours. And I don't know what happens after that. I don't know what the United States attorneys are going to do. We have U.S. attorneys in districts across the country. And my guess would be that many of them would have resigned. And that would then have led to resignations across the department in Washington. And I said, Mr. President, within 24, 48, 72 hours, you could have hundreds and hundreds of resignations of the leadership of your entire Justice Department because of your actions. What's that going to say about you?
Wow.
Does anybody ever talk to him that way? I love this.
Your reaction was to that.
Well,
yeah, no, I think when the president, my recollection, when the president turned to me and said, Steve, you wouldn't leave, would you? I said, Mr. President, I've been with you through 4 attorneys general, including 2 acting attorney general, but I couldn't be part of this. And then the other thing that I said was that, look, all anyone is going to sort of think about when they see this, no one is going to read this letter. All anyone is going to think is that you went through 2 attorneys general in 2 weeks until you found the environmental guy to sign this thing. And so the story is not going to be that the Department of Justice found massive corruption that would have changed the result of the election. It's going to be the disaster of Jeff Clark. And I think at that point, Pat Cipollone said, yeah, this is a murder-suicide pact, this letter.
Murder-suicide.
I would note too, Congressman.
Wow.
It was in this part of the conversation where Steve pointed out that Jeff Clark would be left leading a graveyard. And that comment clearly had an impact on the president. The leadership will be gone. Jeff Clark will be left leading a graveyard.
Again, the premise that, which as Mr. Donahue has said, but that Mr. Clark could come in and take over the Department of Justice and do something different was just an absurd premise. And all he was doing, Mr. Clark, by putting himself forward, was blowing himself up. And, if the president were to have gone that course, it would have been a grievous error for the president as well.
Mr. Cipollone, the White House counsel, told the committee that Mr. Ingalls' response had a noticeable impact on the president, that this was a turning point in the conversation. Mr. Donahue, towards the end of this meeting, did the president ask you what was going to happen to Mr. Clark?
He did. When we finally got to I would say the last 15 minutes of the meeting, the president's decision was apparent. He announced it. Jeff Clark tried to scrape his way back and asked the president to reconsider. The president doubled down, said, no, I've made my decision. That's it. We're not going to do it. And then he turned to me and said, so what happens to him now? Meaning Mr. Clark. And he understood that Mr. Clark reported to me. And I didn't initially understand the question. I said, Mr. President, and he said, are you going to fire him? And I said, I don't have the authority to fire him. He's the Senate confirmed Assistant Attorney General. And he said, well, who has the authority to fire him? And I said, only you do, sir. And he said, well, I'm not going to fire him. I said, all right, well, then we should all go back to work.
Did you get a call from the president later that night?
I did, I don't know, probably 90 minutes later or something like that.
What was that about?
The president, at this point, we left the White House, reconvened at the department. I left the department. I was back in my apartment. My cell phone rang. It was the president, and he had information about a truck supposedly full of shredded ballots in Georgia that was in the custody of an ICE agent whose name he had.
Oh my God.
I told him that ICE was part of Department of Homeland Security. I had heard about this. If Department of Homeland Security needed our assistance, we of course would provide it. But it was really up to DHS to make a call if their agent was involved. And he said, fine, I understand. Can you just make sure that Ken, meaning Ken Cuccinelli, knows about this? I said, fine, I would pass that along to him. I eventually contacted Ken Cuccinelli later that evening, and I said, this is what the president told me. If you guys have anything you think should be brought to our attention, let me know. And he said, thank you, and that was it.
Mr. Cipollone left the meeting convinced the president would not appoint Mr. Clark, but he didn't think the president had actually accepted the truth about the election. Sure enough, all the same debunked theories appeared in his speech at the Ellipse 3 days later.
In the state of Arizona, over 36,000 ballots were illegally cast by non-citizens. 11,600 more ballots and votes were counted, more than there were actual voters. You see that? In Wisconsin, corrupt Democrat-run cities deployed more than
Democratic.
500 illegal, unmanned, unsecured drop boxes, which collected a minimum of 91,000 unlawful votes.
Mr. Donahue, Mr. Rosen, Mr. Engel, and others stopped President Trump's efforts, at least temporarily. Yet the message President Trump and his Republican allies pushed throughout December made its way to his supporters anyway. And they kept up the pressure campaign on the way to storming the Capitol on January 6th. Mr. Rosen, were you at the Department of Justice on January 6th?
Yes, I was there all day.
Once the Capitol was under attack, I understand that you communicated with fellow cabinet members and Capitol Hill leadership. Can you tell us who you spoke to?
Yeah, I was basically on the phone virtually nonstop all day. Some calls with our own DOJ folks, some with cabinet counterparts at DHS and Defense and the Interior, some with senior White House officials, and with a number of congressional leaders. I received calls from Speaker Pelosi, from Leader McCarthy, from Leader Schumer. I believe Leader McConnell's chief of staff called, a number of other members of Congress as well. And the basic thrust of the calls with the members of Congress was, there's a dire situation here, and can you help? And I reported to them that we were, on a very urgent basis, sending help from the department. We wound up sending over 500 agents and officers from FBI, ATF, and the U.S. Marshals to assist with restoring order at the Capitol. So had a number of calls. As I say, it was more or less nonstop all afternoon.
Did you speak to the vice president that day?
Yes, twice.
No, please go ahead.
Well, I was going to say the first call was a one-on-one discussion, somewhat akin to the congressional leadership calls, updating him on what we were doing to assist. And the second call was a conference call around 7 o'clock with the vice president, congressional leaders, senior White House staff, some other cabinet officials, to address that order appeared to be close to being restored, but security still being determined. And the question being, what time could the Congress reassemble? And the answer was 8 o'clock, and thankfully Congress did reassemble and complete its constitutional duty, there was one highlight of that second call with the vice president, which is Mr. Donahue had gone to the rotunda of the Capitol to be able to give firsthand account and was able to tell the folks on the call, including the vice president, that we thought 8 o'clock would work.
Did you speak to the president on January 6th?
No, I spoke to a number of senior White House officials, but not the president.
Mr. Donahue, on January 6th, we know from Mr. Rosen that you helped in the effort to reconvene the joint session. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
We see here in a video that we're going to play now, you arriving with your security detail to help secure the Capitol. Mr. Donahue, 30 minutes after you arrived at the Capitol, did you lead a briefing for the vice president?
I'm not sure exactly what the time frame was, but I did participate in the call and participate in briefing the vice president as well as the congressional leadership that night. Yes.
And where'd you conduct that call at?
I was in an office. I'm not entirely sure where it was. My detail found it because the acoustics in the rotunda were such that it wasn't really conducive to having a call. So they found an office. We went to that office, and I believe I participated in 2 phone calls, one at 1800 and one at 1900 that night from that office.
What time did you actually end up leaving the Capitol?
I waited until the Senate was back in session, which I believe they were gabbled in a few minutes after 8 p.m. And once they were back in session and we were confident that the entire facility was secured and cleared, that there were no individuals hiding in closets or under desks, that there were no IEDs or other suspicious devices left behind, I left minutes later. I was probably gone by 8:30.
And Mr. Donahue, did you ever hear from President Trump that day?
No. Like the AG, the acting AG, I spoke to Pat Cipollone and Mark Meadows and the vice president and the congressional leadership, but I never spoke to the president that day.
So in today's hearing, showcase the efforts of the Americans before us to stand up for democracy. Mr. Rosen, Mr. Donahue stayed steadfastly committed to the oath they take as officials in the Department of Justice. On January 6th itself, they assisted during the attack while our commander-in-chief stayed silent. Their bravery is a high moment in the sordid story of what led to January 6th. My colleagues and I up here also take an oath. Some of them failed to uphold theirs and instead chose to spread the big lie. Days after the tragic events of January 6th, some of these same Republican members requested pardons in the waning days of the Trump administration.
Then they come up with the chyron there that he is a
5 days after the
Republican,
attack on the Capitol, Representative Mo Brooks sent the email on the screen now. As you see, he emailed the White House, quote, pursuant to a request from Matt Gaetz, requesting a pardon for Representative Gaetz himself and unnamed others.
Wow.
Witnesses told the Select Committee that the president considered offering pardons to a wide range of individuals connected to the president. Let's listen to some of that testimony.
And was Representative Gaetz requesting a pardon?
Believe so. The general tone was, we may get prosecuted because we were defensive of, the president's positions on these things. The pardon that he was requesting, was as broad as you could describe. From the beginning, I remember he's from the beginning of time up until today, for any and all things. He mentioned Nixon, and I said Nixon's pardon was never nearly that broad.
And are you aware of any members of Congress seeking pardons?
I guess Mr. Gaetz and Mr. Brooks, I know, both advocated for there to be a blanket pardon for members involved in that meeting, and a handful of other members that weren't at the December 21st meeting as the preemptive pardons. Mr. Gaetz was personally pushing for a pardon. He was doing so since early December.
Yeah, what a little chicken shit.
Wow. I'm not sure why.
To ask if you could have a meeting with Mr. Meadows about receiving a presidential pardon.
They all contact you?
not all of them, but several of them did.
So you mentioned Mr. Gates, Mr. Brooks.
Mr. Biggs did. Mr. Jordan talked about congressional pardons, but he never asked me for one. It was more for an update on whether the White House is going to pardon members of Congress.
He was asking for one.
He was just checking to see if they were available before he asked for one.
Mr. Perry asked for a pardon too. I'm sorry.
Mr. Perry, did he spell that copy correctly?
Yes, he did.
Did Marjorie Taylor Greene contact you?
No, she didn't contact me about it. I heard that she had asked White House Counsel Office for a pardon.
Oh.
Mr. Philbin,
Wow.
but I didn't frequently communicate with Ms. Green.
Are you
Lucky
aware
woman.
of any conversations or communications regarding the possibility of giving Congressman Matt Gaetz a pardon?
I know he had asked for it, but I don't know if he ever received one or what happened with it.
How do you know that Congressman
Oh
Gaetz
my
asked
God,
for a pardon?
McAtee.
He told me.
Tell us about that.
He told me to ask Meadows.
These people have to walk through the
Were
halls
you
of
involved in, or
Congress.
did you witness any conversations
Today.
about the possibility of a blanket pardon for everyone involved in January 6th?
I had heard that mentioned. Yeah.
And he has the worst background ever.
You have worse. What is that? It's so weird.
Family members.
He might be at a casino, so he had to black it out.
I know he had hinted at a blanket pardon for the January 6th thing for anybody, but I think he had for all the staff and everyone involved, not with January 6th, but just before he left office, I know he had talked about that.
The only reason I know to ask for a pardon is because you think you've committed a crime. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
You get a pardon,
I want
and
to
you get a
thank our
pardon,
witnesses
and you get
for
a
joining
pardon.
us today. The members of the
But
select
they
committee
didn't.
may have additional questions for today's witnesses, and we ask that you
Handing them
respond
out like they're
expeditiously
ginger
in
mints.
writing to these questions. Without objection, members will be permitted 10 business days to submit statements for the record, including opening remarks and additional questions for the witnesses. Without objection, the chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois for a closing statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Justice Department lawyers are not the president's personal lawyers. We count on them to be on the side of the law and to
Except
defend
Bill Barr.
the best interest of the United States, not the best interest of any political campaign. That's how it's been since the department was founded soon after the Civil War. Justice Department lawyers are supposed to play it 100% straight. President Trump tried to erase his loss at the ballot box by parachuting an unqualified man into the top job at justice. It was a power play to win at all costs with no regard for the will of the American people. It was about ignoring millions of votes. Ignore them, throw them out, label them fraudulent, corrupt, illegal, whatever. Facts were clearly just an inconvenience. From the Oval Office, President Trump urged others to bring his big lie to life. He begged, just say the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republican congressman. He didn't care what the department's investigations proved. What good were facts when they would only confirm his loss? And it's no surprise that all the far out, fully fabricated, whack job conspiracy theories collapsed under even the slightest scrutiny. That insanity went from the internet to the highest levels of government in no time. The bottom line, the most senior leadership of the Justice Department, from Attorney General Bill Barr to Jeff Rosen, his successor and his deputy, Rich Donahue, everyone except Jeff Clark, was telling President Trump the very same thing. The conspiracy theories were false. The allegation of a stolen election was a lie. The data left no room for doubt, nothing to question. And the Constitution left no room for President Trump to change the outcome of the election. But we're here today because the facts were irrelevant to President Trump. It was about protecting his very real power and very fragile ego, even if it required recklessly undermining our entire electoral system by wildly casting baseless doubt upon it. In short, he was willing to sacrifice our republic to prolong his presidency. I can imagine no more dishonorable act by a president.
Wow.
We owe a great debt of gratitude to these men you've heard from here today. Real leaders who stood for justice when it was in grave peril, who put their country first when the leader of the free world demanded otherwise. They threatened to resign rather than corrupt our democracy. And thanks largely to each of them, President Trump's coup failed. Contrast that to Jeff Clark, who would do exactly what the president wanted. Say there was massive fraud, forget the facts, and leave the rest to President Trump's congressional friends. Mr. Clark refused to cooperate with this committee. He pled the fifth over 125 times. Why risk self-incrimination? And President Trump's congressional friends, some of them are angling for pardons. They knew that every bit of what they did was a lie and it was wrong. That's all the more reason to respect those who came here to testify today. We thank them for their unflinching service in the face of incredible pressure. As it said, the only thing necessary for evil to succeed is good men to do nothing.
Just laid them
Thankfully,
out.
there were good people in the Department of Justice. You heard from other good people too on Tuesday. They too defended us. But I'm still worried that not enough has changed to prevent this from happening again. The oath that we take has to mean something. It has to cut to the core of who we are and be the driving force of our service to this nation. We on this committee, we may be able to shine light on the darkness, but that is not enough. It's now up to every American, now and in the future, to stand for truth, to reject the lies wherever we confront them, in our towns, in our capitals, in our friendships, in our families, and at the ballot box, and within our own minds and hearts. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, he's going to run for president at some
Without
point.
objection, the chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Wyoming, Ms. Cheney, for a closing statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I again want to thank the witnesses for being here today. After today, I suspect that there will be some who label you agents of the deep state or something else conspiratorial or nonsensical, meant to justify ignoring what you've said today, ignoring the facts. That may be the short-term cost of acting honorably and telling the truth, but your actions should have an important long-term impact. They will help keep us on the course set by the framers of our Constitution. Let me paraphrase the words of John Adams and others. Whether ours shall continue to be a government of laws and not of men is ultimately for the American people to decide. And let me also today make a broader statement to millions of Americans who put their trust in Donald Trump. In these hearings so far, you've heard from more than a dozen Republicans who've told you what actually happened in the weeks before January 6th. You will hear from more in the hearings to come. Several of them served Donald Trump and his administration, others in his campaign. Others have been conservative Republicans for their entire careers. It can be difficult to accept that President Trump abused your trust, that he deceived you. Many will invent excuses to ignore that fact, but that is a fact. I wish it weren't true, but it is. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Again, I thank our witnesses and thank my colleagues for this hearing. As we conclude our fifth hearing in this series, I want to remind the American people of a few things the committee has shown. Donald Trump lost the 2020 election. Top Republican officials who supported Trump knew that he lost and told him he lost. Trump knew he lost. Those who say the election was affected by widespread voter fraud are lying. They were lying in 2020, they were lying in 2021, and indeed, they are lying today. Donald Trump went to court. That's the right any candidate seeking to challenge the outcome of an election must do. Donald Trump lost in court dozens and dozens of times. He lost in part because there was no evidence that voter fraud had any impact on the results of the election. To borrow a phrase from our witness earlier this week, Mr. Bowers, all he had was theories and no evidence. As I've
Rudy
said,
Giuliani.
if you're running for office in the United States, that's the end of the line. You accept the court's judgment, you concede the race, you respect the rule of law and the will of the voters. But for Donald Trump, that wasn't the end of the line, not even close. The voters refused to keep him in office. The courts refused to keep him in office, but he continued to lie. And he went in search of anyone who would go along with his scheme. And we've shown today, he pressured the Justice Department to act as an arm of his reelection campaign. He hoped law enforcement officials would give the appearance of legitimacy to his lies, so he and his allies had some veneer of credibility when they told the country that the election was stolen. Earlier this week, we showed how Donald Trump brought the weight of the presidency down on local and state officials who are trying to do their jobs and ultimately did. They investigated his claims and found them to be false. And then they endured Trump's pressure campaign at great risk to themselves and their loved ones. And of course, there was a scheme to get the former Vice President, Mike Pence, to violate the law and the Constitution by rejecting the Electoral College votes on January 6th and blocking the peaceful transfer of power. I mentioned the former Vice President last because, as we showed, when he refused to bow to the pressure in those critical moments on January 6th, there was a backup plan for stopping the transfer of power. The mob and their vile threats. Up to this point, we've shown the inner workings of what was essentially a political coup, an attempt to use the powers of the government from the local level all the way up to overturn the results of the election. Find me the votes, send fake electors, just say the election was corrupt. Along the way, we saw threats of violence. We saw what some people were willing to do in the service of the nation, the Constitution, no, in service of Donald Trump. When the Select Committee continues this series of hearings, we're going to show how Donald Trump tapped into the threat of violence, how he summoned the mob to Washington, and how, after corruption and political pressure failed to keep Donald Trump in office, violence became the last option. Our investigation is ongoing. Those hearings have spurred an influx of new information that the committee and our investigators are working to assess. We are committed to presenting the American people with the most complete information possible. That will be our aim when we reconvene in the coming weeks. The chair, however, requests those in the hearing room remain seated until the Capitol Police have escorted members from the room. Without objection, the committee stands adjourned.
Okay, so that was the conclusion of the fifth hearing of the January 6th Select Committee. Joining me for post-hearing analysis, George Hahn, Gentile, Dahlia Lithwick, Brian Karam, Wajid Ali, how's your car? Charlotte Clymer, and John Fugelsang. Wow.
Big wow.
Yeah. Big wow. You know, I'm actually relieved that this hearing wasn't as emotional because we can take only so much. This morning with SCOTUS rulings was bad enough. I think it was good to kind of step back and have a very cut and dried presentation of this almost unfathomable attempt to corrupt the Department of Justice, to do everything in his power, Donald's power, to overturn the results of a free and fair election. One thing, and this is a question I've had earlier, people were really still trying to speak to his better angels, or whatever the expression is. I mean, to say, what do you have to lose? Well, this would be terrible for the country. He doesn't fucking care, so it's sort of interesting. It'd be bad for your honor. He doesn't care. He wanted to stay in power. But that sort of bizarre naivete aside, and it wasn't just these guys, a bunch of other people have been saying they were shocked by certain things he did. Instead of calming down the situation, he poured gasoline on it. No kidding. This was one of, I think, the most direct hits on any attempt to change the subject away from Donald's responsibility, to make it seem like, it's just Eastman and Giuliani. And Representative Cheney said it at the outset that Donald was coordinating absolutely all of this. So if anybody wants to jump in with any... Oh, wait, one other thing too, and I don't know if it necessarily matters, but we got to see some of the video of that just so that Italian thing, that conspiracy theory that was such obvious bullshit. I wish we had seen the video of the vote counting in Georgia, because there were so many lies about it, and I think just seeing it would have made a really compelling case for just how despicable and damaging the lies about it were. That they were.
Their car's still getting fixed, so
What?
Said their car's still getting fixed, so
Yeah, Waj, unmute yourself if you have anything really personal to share with us.
Well, my car is still being fixed. Pray for my car. I think that's what's most important. Not democracy, but my car. But I do think, when you talk about Italy Gate, there's a piece that I've always tried to bring up in my articles that people forget, that Bill Barr, when he went and did a tour of Europe, he actually promoted this BS Italy Gate. It was in the New York Times, and people always forget that he was part and parcel of it. So when people try to claim that he's a hero, we discussed this during the break, Mary, I really want to know how much Bill Barr really knew, because he actually promoted it until it was too much for him. I thought today was a damning day against Trump. The fact that you had members of the Justice Department, long-term conservatives, Rosen, Donahue, Engel, repeatedly and consistently over 2 hours talk about how Donald Trump himself tried to pressure the Justice Department to promote what he knew was a bullshit conspiracy theory to implement his coup. The fact that they named names, the fact that you have Jeffrey Clark. Dude, lawyer up Jeffrey Clark. You are effed. That's one. The other man, Kluklowski, I think, was another person who better lawyer up. John Eastman, Rudy Giuliani, and then the capper at the end, the chef's kiss, that it wasn't just Scott Perry who went for the pardon. The names that I got, and please fill me in if I'm wrong: Gates, Brooks, Green, Gohmert, Perry.
Biggs, Jordan just asked if it's on the menu, he may order it, but
there you
go.
Right.
I don't know if I really want it yet. Gohmert, Perry, Green, and Brooks.
Yeah,
And
Jordan
Jordan
just wanted to hear the specials.
And the last thing I'll say is they've, hats off to them for the committee for the way they've orchestrated it. Very strategic, 2 hours tight. Each testimony has been slam dunk, in my opinion. They're building a case, they're building a narrative, and the fact that they left it on this beautiful teaser, right? But by the way, here's a video of Republicans telling you other Republicans who asked for the broadest pardons on earth, because that's what a normal person does who hasn't committed a crime, ask for the broadest pardon on earth. And by the way, see you next time. Bye.
Right. Yeah. And it's not surprising at all that Matt Gaetz would basically be asking a pardon for everything he's done since he was conceived. So,
his parents may have won a pardon for that conception, but that's another story.
They shouldn't get one. Yeah. So,
I think there's one thing that we still really have to underline. These are, these are Republicans trying to get rid of the poison of the Trump era. They're trying to excise this cancer with the assistance of the Democrats, hoping to return us to some kind of norm. We've seen what they've outlined, the charges against the president that they're seeking, conspiracy against the United States. They had Jacobs on, who talked about the real principles of the Republican Party, smaller government and originalist thinking in the Constitution. Everything that they've done, none of this has been left to chance. I think this is probably one of the best planned hearings I've ever seen in my lifetime. Much better than with Watergate, it was almost a shock every day, and it was ongoing. And I remember watching those, going, "Okay, get to the point, get to the point, get to the point." These are staged, well-manufactured hearings with an end game in mind, and that end game, and I think it will happen. I think Donald Trump will be indicted. I don't think there's any doubt that his stooges will be indicted. Right now, his home was raided, folks. The last time that happened, it's such a rarity to have someone's home raided. Michael Cohen was the exception. Now you've got the assistant AG. He's going down.
And that's great. That's great. But I'm a little skeptical about Donald. I hope you're right. But it's not going to happen anytime soon. So let's be clear about that. I think the earliest is next spring. I'm glad you brought this up there, Brian, that these are people who are trying to excise the rot, the cancer, the Donald cancer at the heart of the Republican Party, blah, blah, blah. But not you, blah, blah, blah. But, that is something devoutly to be wished. However,
what do the lawyers have to say? Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. What did the lawyers have to say about the indictments, Jen and Dahlia?
Let me just finish my thought, and then I definitely want to get their reaction to that as well. That these guys, and I don't know what they would have to say, but we know that some of the people who testified the other day, who were incredibly compelling and seemed to be on the right side of everything and understood the threat, they're going to vote for Donald if he's the fucking nominee in 2024. What does that tell us about the lack of seriousness behind their pretense of trying to save democracy? So Jen, Dahlia, did Brian leave because
you hurt his feelings, Mary?
I didn't mean to. I was talking too much, so I was shortening what I was doing. Was like blah,
He's
blah,
our
blah.
gentle giant.
Anyway, I think he'll be fine, and hopefully he'll come back. But Jen, Dahlia, whoever wants to take this first. Yes, what are your thoughts about potential indictments, and what are your thoughts about the way these Republicans, just no matter what, seem to be totally against American democracy?
Jen, did you want to go first? I mean, I would just say a couple things. One is, I think, and we said this in the last break, today I think was devastating for Donald Trump. I mean, I just think you have contemporaneous evidence given under oath from people sitting in the room. And this is really different from the last couple of days where it was, Giuliani directed this, Jenna Ellis did this, John Eastman did this. This is Donald Trump directing it. And, to the extent that Jeff Clark was meant to be the guy thrown under the bus, I mean, I think he was born under the bus. I just don't think, I don't think that guy has a chance, but I also don't think he looked like the great brain of this, the way sometimes you had the sense that John Eastman looked like the great brain. This was a guy who's just a stooge, who was the guy willing to carry the water, but didn't actually want anything other than to be close to power. And so I think today is just a complete shellacking for the president, former president. And I guess the other thing I would just say is just apropos of what you just asked, Mary, I'm so struck by the way that, the testimony earlier this week, he sent mobs to scare my family and like have pistols and people with militia insignias on my street, but I'd vote for him anyway.
While my daughter was dying and
While my daughter
terrified
was
of the
dying
mob.
and my wife was terrified. I think today was exactly the flip of that. I think you heard from a bunch of very serious, very senior DOJ people who basically said this guy was a complete and total clown show. And that the idea that, what we heard earlier in the week, that he was just juvenile, but I'd vote for him again. No, today I heard this was a menace. This was a threat to constitutional democracy. And I think in addition to sort of the conversation about, his legal liability, I think the more interesting thing is the political liability, because I think today was an absolute gut punch for all of those people who are like, yeah, he was a little goofy, but, he didn't do any harm. Today seemed to signal to me that, holy hell, these people thought he was capable of tearing it all down.
Mm-hmm. So do you think, Dahlia, and then Jen, I want to get to you. Do you think that indictment in the non-technical sense will redound to other members of the Republican Party, like the DeSantises and the Hawleys and the Cottons, who, well, not DeSantis because he's a governor, but clearly has supported Donald until recently, and he sees his own 2020-24 opening, but senators and Congress people who were all in on the big lie and all in for overturning. Can we hope that much?
I actually think they're all going to be, the more Trump himself is on the hook for it, the less they are on the hook for it. And I think that politically it redounds to all of their benefit.
That's what I worry about. Okay, Jen, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, picking up, guys, there's my, my legal analysis and the political. I'm going to start with the political where Dahlia left off. I mean, we're hearing now, the Kochs are supposedly backing DeSantis. You see Mehmet Oz very cleverly in the primary, welcoming Donald's support when he sort of skates through and gets just, wins the primary. Now suddenly, who's Donald who? And so I think the real question is going to be between, primary time and election, whether it's 2022 or 2024, how Republican candidates like DeSantis can be like, I'm the second coming of Donald. And then suddenly Donald who, right? And because they have to, but they can't completely throw him under the bus because they don't want to lose in the general. I mean, it's going to be really interesting. And what I'm hoping is that your uncle is angry and vengeful and ruins their lives and throws them under the bus somehow because he's going to be so angry that they're not honoring him. But that's the only hope we have for not this helping revive, I think, some of those Republican candidates. Just given how much the electoral system is tilted in an undemocratic way against us. On the legal side of things, so that's depressing. But on the legal side of things, you just absolutely see the evidence of the conspiracy coming into place with Donald in the center of it. I mean, we can talk about what we saw. We already talked about it earlier, but for folks who are just sort of tuning in, hearing Donahue, the acting deputy attorney general, under oath, say what he said. It has contemporaneous notes, and there are many people in the room corroborating him, saying, we said to, this is, I think Clark was even in the room. This is when he just, he's so angry about them not believing him that he really won. And they said, we're not going to, the Department of Justice can't just flip the switch and say you're the winner. And he said, I'm not asking you to do that. Just, say there was fraud or whatever he says. And I'll do the rest. Me and Republican members of Congress. Are those the same people who are seeking the pardon? So this is, we know, we have this under oath. We have the contemporaneous notes. This is the direct evidence the committee is promising, now, unlike a couple of days ago, with this, I feel like there's enough to indict him, both in Georgia and Fulton County, and at the DOJ, but that's not going to happen in terms of timing. That I think Fulton County might happen in next month. I don't think the DOJ is going to do this yet. I don't think it's any indictment of Donald would happen until 2023 after we get
That's right.
the oath keepers and so on.
Yeah. So Charlotte, you and I spoke after last hearings about the horrific idea that that this will benefit the Republican Party, which is so unfair, really. And it does make me wonder about what the fuck time we're living in right now, considering how enabled he has been. But do you think there's anything that's happened so far that points to another way out? Because again, it may not be jumping out yet, but it's so obvious that it wasn't just him.
Yeah. So, I mean, let's be clear here. 95% of Americans are not going to watch this hearing, right? In fact, way more than that. In fact, I'm actually being
20 million is more than
watching the entire
5%.
watching the bulk of the hearing. So we're looking for those little bits of the testimony that can be put into people's living rooms and attack ads, right? Richard Donahue talking about how he stood in the Oval Office and told Trump directly to his face that this was unacceptable and that the Justice Department would resign en masse if he tried to install Clark. That is the perfect soundbite. Cut 30 seconds of that and played that endlessly all through the midterms. Do that, exactly that. And I guarantee that would be compelling. I really hope the DNC is currently just putting a ton of money into those kind of attack ads. That would be the smartest way to go forward.
Yeah, and along those lines, George, how about just an endless loop of all of those Congress people who, I mean, I think it should be enough to condemn them that they voted against certifying the election, but that's just me. It's like 150 of them. But having the video of people saying, oh yeah, that one asked for a pardon, that one asked for a pardon, and Kinzinger saying only guilty people ask for pardons, right?
Well, that's all porn for me. I mean, I could watch that on a loop. And
that's the idea.
Right.
Get it on a loop.
But clearly what excites me about getting rid of him doesn't excite enough people. But I am on the same page with you, Mary, about getting, how do I want to put it? I will get excited. We have been teed up so many times in the last few years to get excited that something's going to happen. And then it's just like a real sort of like boner killer. Like, really? That was it? You know, I will get excited not just when I see him in cuffs. I'll get excited when there's a conviction. That's when I'll get real, like, call me then. Yeah. And then I'll get on the cheerleading team and I will cater the shit. Like, I will throw that party. Because I think you and you are, I think, very much on that page of like, I'll believe it when I see it, because he's like eluded so much. You know, he's a sneaky, slippery, you know, all of that. And also, someone else earlier brought up, you know, these are Republicans saying these things. These are Republican witnesses. That matters. That's huge. That's not nothing at all. And also clearly professionals, experts, career public servants who were transparently just so exasperated with this guy. You know, the way they described, you know, them just sitting there around a table on a speakerphone call, and they're just looking at each other like, can you fucking believe this guy? Talking about like putting a moat on the other side of the wall with alligators in it. And they're all just going like, what is this? You know, and they're the adults in the room clearly were in no mood to tolerate much more of them. So there's that. And also the evidence, the documents and the testimony presented here is so exquisitely presented. I gotta say, in these hearings, I'm not one to watch this kind of stuff. Like, I nod off, I get bored, whatever. Like, we were just all of us here today. I'm just watching it, like, you know, reaching for popcorn. If it were there, this is huge. Riveting. Yeah. And so they're doing. This committee's doing a beautiful job presenting all of this. But back to, as you said at the beginning of this, I'll get excited when I see cuffs and a conviction. That's, you know, I'm going to temper my excitement for, you know, until I see any of that. I don't want to be a Debbie Downer.
Yeah, well, listen, we have to be realistic because, as you mentioned, nothing's happened yet. Literally
Right.
nothing's happened. That all of these people roam free and are continuing to do massive amounts of damage.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, John. It's like the window keeps moving because initially I would have thought, all right, if this hearing, if this committee can make it clear that Donald was responsible, then it follows that the Republican Party is, because they supported
Yes.
him at every turn. And let's be
Yes.
clear, I know that there are issues. I think that one of the reasons that Ginny Thomas hasn't been subpoenaed is probably because of at least Liz Cheney. So they do have to walk a line and compromise, unfortunately. However, neither Cheney nor Kinzinger has pulled any punches. They are going right after their colleagues. And yet I am continue to be left with this sinking feeling that the Republican Party itself will just turn around and say, it was him, it was Donald, and we're going to turn America into a theocratic apartheid state with the help of the Supreme Court.
Yes, theocratic state, but without any of that pesky Jesus teaching. They finally
That's right.
perfect Christianity. You take all the Christ parts out of it. You're right about this. Now, let's remember when we were warning these folks that Bush and Cheney were lying them into an unwinnable war in Iraq and had economic policies that would cause terrible, terrible effects on the American people and the world economy. When we were telling them that Bush talking about the ownership society and getting Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to loosen up all these mortgages was going to cause a housing crisis because they were pushing mortgages on folks who couldn't pay them, they hated us. When we warned them about Bush and Cheney, they hated us. When we were proven right about all that, they hated us even more.
Yep.
When we warned them about Trump, they hated us. But then something funny happened. Trump told them everything we told them about Bush and Cheney, that they were robbed, that they were swindled into this war, that the war was a racket. And suddenly Trump gave them permission to face the truth that they had been wrong. There was no come to Jesus moment, no humility. Suddenly Bush was persona non grata. They were always anti-war. They were never for the Iraq war. They even believed that Donald Trump had opposed the Iraq war. So we shouldn't be shocked that while we're still here talking about Trump's crimes, they've already moved beyond it. Dr. Oz has taken all mention of Donald Trump off of his social media and his campaign website. The Kochs, of course, have already moved on. I'm not holding out any hope for Donald Trump to ever be in cuffs. I don't think that will ever happen. His penance will be shoveling money to defense attorneys for the rest of his lifetime. The only thing I want from Donald Trump is...
And hopefully me, but that's a different issue.
Exactly right. Hopefully shoveling money to you and your attorneys for the rest of his lifetime. The only thing that Trump can do of any value at this point to me is hurt Ron DeSantis because of his fragile ego. But the very fact that Donald Trump sold his bribery money hole hotel in D.C. makes me really believe the grift is done in that regard, and he's not going to run for president again, which is tragic. As I've mentioned before, I'd love to see a man lose the popular vote for the third time. It's never been done. Only he has a shot. So, today was very valuable, but at the same time, I have this creeping sense of dread. Last week, we were watching these hearings, and while we were all watching the hearings, the Supreme Court got rid of the separation of church and state. Today, we're watching the hearings, and while we're watching the hearings, the Supreme Court got rid of states' rights regarding gun legislation, and the Supreme Court got rid of Miranda rights. Every liberal who in a swing state who was too pure to vote for Hillary Clinton, we can thank for this 6-3 Supreme Court right now. And I sort of feel like while we're focused on what Trump did, the rest of these evil, fascist, godless, fake Christian motherfuckers are looking to the future, and they use Trump. They have discarded him like Trump discarding a wife. To me, the greatest value of this committee is not what they can get Trump on. It's can they prevent the next time this could happen? Because Trump is done like disco.
That is such a good point. And Waj, I want to stay there for a second.
Mm-hmm.
When these hearings started, I believed that it was a forward-looking endeavor. Obviously, holding Donald accountable, but making sure this kind of thing doesn't happen again. And I inferred by that that the Republican Party itself was also going to be. And it does seem that, yes, both of those things. we're looking ahead. They do reference the future elections. And again, they are perfectly willing to indict Cheney and Kinzinger, their fellow Republicans. All good. However, what I didn't see, it's not that I didn't see it coming. I didn't really think about it at all. One of the great tragedies of having taken so long, and I think we understand why it did, is that it allowed too many people to move on and have Trumpism survive Donald. They don't need him anymore, and yet it's the same movement with the same people who are going to keep doing and let's be clear, this wasn't Donald's agenda. He didn't give a shit. He was going to do whatever he was told to do in order for him to have power and to play at being president, right? So that's the only other thing, other than some level of accountability. And unfortunately, I'm not sure it matters if Donald is taken out of the equation by the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, because I don't think he's relevant necessarily anymore. But the idea that, and I completely lost my train of thought because I was asking you a 7,000 part question. My apologies.
I got it. I'm with you.
Okay, so just the final thing though is that they are setting up a situation in which the hearings won't matter. Like, they won't matter if, and again, this is the only way I think going forward they can in the future of American democracy sense, is if these hearings convince Democrats to start playing hardball, expand the Supreme Court, et cetera. But I'm just saying, like, that's the only way these hearings can be relevant in a way that will matter to our lives, right, Waj? Or, I mean, not right,
so,
what do you think?
I've said it before on your show twice, and I'll say it again. I don't think the modern democratic leadership is built for this fight and made for this moment, unfortunately. In this moment, we're facing a radicalized and violent white supremacist movement that is playing for all the marbles. They believe that we are taking their country from them, and they will take it back by any means necessary. I just released an article, I wrote it last night, where I said the institutions will not hold. So politically, even with these hearings, even if we don't win the next election, this is what's happening very quickly. Democrats, if they lose the House and if they lose the Senate, which is most likely, right now you're seeing the Republican Party purge pretty much anyone from their party that does not support the big lie. Dan Crenshaw, who is a hard right conservative from Texas, was accosted at the Texas GOP convention and called Eye Patch McCain and a traitor. Why? Because he did not support the big lie. Mo Brooks, who wore Kevlar vest, and Ali Alexander, who organized the Stop the Steal rally, said he planned the Stop the Steal rally with Mo Brooks, just because Mo Brooks later then said, okay, we got to move on. We can't support the big lie. Just lost his primary, and he's retired, and he said the bad guys won. Well, the bad guys have taken over all the institutions. They're implementing a precinct strategy. They have the Supreme Court. I don't have to talk about it. You guys know what's happening, and I wish this committee spends time investigating Ginny Thomas and Clarence Thomas to make people aware about the ongoing threat of the Supreme Court. The Gallup poll just came out that said that it's the lowest approval rating in their history of their polling. Only 25% of Americans believe in the Supreme Court, right?
Not
and
low
now
enough, but...
yeah, and then you got the House, which is being purged of Republicans, the Senate, which is being purged, and as we have seen that, if not for just a few people in the Justice Department, if there were Republicans there who, like Jeff Clark, who were the Attorney General, we would have a constitutional crisis. Our democratic election would have been usurped. There would not have been a normal, peaceful transfer of power, and Donald Trump would be president right now, or it'd all go to hell. So what's stopping us from, let's just call it for what it is, right-wing fascism? And the only thing that's stopping us, Mary, that I see, is if somehow Democrats retain the leadership in the House and the Senate, which seems exceedingly unlikely, thanks to what we've mentioned, history, trends, inflation right now, and the Electoral College, which completely screws the majority to benefit the minority. The benefit of the hearing, though, is, as mentioned strategically, and I hate that we have to think like this, is if Donald Trump, being Donald Trump, goes on an egotistical rampage against Ron DeSantis, whom he does not like, and chips away at him enough, and the GOP cannibalizes itself enough, and that enough of the majority realizes the threat that they come out and barely give us the House and the Senate to stave this off. There's a lot of ifs there. And the final thing I'll say, which is why I am cynical, and I believe that we're in some dark days ahead, is Ron DeSantis and other Republicans like Abbott have realized that Trumpism works. Trumpism will outlast Trump. There's no consequence to this. The base likes it when we're more cruel, when we're more racist, when we believe in the conspiracy. There is literally no penalty to promoting the big lie. 108 Republicans have won their primary since May, all support the big lie. So let's double down and triple down. And the problem is Ron DeSantis is far more intelligent and less self-destructive than your uncle.
And more ideological.
And also tied to the Koch brothers. He'll do the bidding of the corporations and he'll advance the populist agenda. You'll have the marriage between the money and the populist agenda. They'll come in power. You've seen Florida, and last thing I'll say, Florida and Texas, but specifically Florida and DeSantis is a great laboratory for people who are watching how Republicans will run the country. They will use and abuse the power of the state to crack down on all critics, on all corporations, against Disney if they have to. So politically, we're effed, I think. But for history, for posterity, Democrats need to flex the majority and the power that they have for the next 6 months and fight fire with fire, put on the brass knuckles, and punch the bully in the mouth if we have a chance to survive. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
Okay, Waj, give me a reason to not go score some heroin and start smoking again. I just quit smoking.
I want
Should I
a
start back up
cigarette right
again?
now, and I haven't smoked in like 20 years.
Because the majority, George, look, we have the majority. When the majority flexes, we win. Look at the school boards. When the majority shows up at the school board protest, we shut down the CRT bullshit. When the majority show up at the election polls, we shut down. When the majority votes, we win. The majority actually has the country, but the political ecosystem right now is being threatened by a radicalized minority that wakes up every day committed to this ideological zealotry. That's the problem.
But absolutely. But another problem, Dahlia, is that how much does that matter if we're the majority, if our leadership isn't representing us? Because clearly, I mean, I don't think the 6 of us are alone. We kind of want people to fight. We want our leaders to fight for us and for the future of our country and for our children. Basically, we're against everything the Supreme Court is trying to do to this country. So, but if our leadership doesn't get it, and again, nobody can explain to me how that's possible. It's insane. You have to be brain dead or seriously mentally ill not to understand the threat that faces us. What the fuck, Dahlia? I mean, what is it going to take?
I mean, 2 things. One thing that I was, the heroin seeking me, like right there with you, really want to develop a very,
it's just time to start smoking again.
Very dangerous self-harming habit tonight. But
please don't do that.
Okay, just mulling. But one of the things I really thought today, and I'm sort of sitting with it, and I'm curious what you all think, is today was kind of a 2.5-hour infomercial for the independence of the Justice Department, right? Yeah. And that if I'm Merrick Garland, today was a great day because it really absolutely lifted up all of the, both sides have to adhere to these rules and both sides have to, value these norms. And it was so interesting because so much of what Rosen and Donahue were saying is the kind of stuff that that Merrick Garland says when people say, why aren't you pushing harder? And so I really am struck by how does this help that we just got 2 hours of why it's essential for the Justice Department to conduct itself as though it is completely unaware of the political world around it. And then I just think the other thing I want to say, just to sort of dovetail with what a couple of folks have said today, is I thought one of the most interesting moments was Kitzinger saying, this is going to happen again. Because it's really different when I say, as I've been saying on all of these conversations, they're setting up this independent state legislature theory. They're choking off the vote. They are literally setting up a situation in which the majority will have less and less electoral power. And everyone's fine with that. They just want to put it on Donald Trump in January 6th. So to hear a Republican say, oh no, this is actually all the blueprint to do it again, I actually thought was kind of a signal change, because if what he's saying is, oh no, we don't want this to happen again, and this isn't just, armed insurrection and death, it's stealing an election and not having a peaceful transfer of power, that actually felt to me like, say that again, say it twice.
Yes, say it a lot, because that information needs to live outside of the hearings. Brian Charlotte said earlier that, fewer than 5% of the people in this country are watching these hearings, and that's probably true.
Well, if it's the right if it's the right percentage, that's okay. Right now,
I don't know about that. I don't know. Wait a second. First of all,
Biggs, Jordan, Gohmert, Perry, or Marjorie Taylor Greene walking through the halls of Congress. I think that they exposed them for who they were. If nothing else, I do think I agree with the infomercial part. Well, you know what?
It's okay. We know what you mean.
That I agree with that part, but I think it's more than that. The timing of bringing Jeffrey Clark out of his house in his PJs and tying Pasty Boy down to the ground, it cannot be overlooked. That doughy, pasty face little white boy ain't going to spend any time in prison. And today was a shot across the bow to Donald Trump, much as the Cohen, when they did it to Cohen. This is not going to end well for Donald Trump. I don't think we've learned today that there is a Department of Justice investigation. There probably is a grand jury impaneled, and they are being very secretive about it, because when you go hunting for bear, you want to get the bear. And you can't take a shot at the king, as Shakespeare said, and unless you get him. Yeah, right. That's where they're going with this. And all those other stooges are going to fall. And I think Rudy and John Eastman, all of them need a new clean pair of underwear after the last few hearings. I don't think this ends well. I don't think Donald Trump runs for re-election. I think that the nation made a huge commitment to trying to secure democracy with these hearings, and it was the Republican Party who has done it, because the Republican Party has moved very quickly in trying to make sure that they're divulging themselves with the poison of Donald Trump. I don't think that there's any way that you can get any other way.
That's so dangerous, though. I mean, I agree with you. But first of all,
it's in a dangerous place.
No.
You can't walk up to the edge and not walk back.
But okay. So first of all, last I checked, Michael Cohen went to prison. Donald lives in the Oval Office as unindicted co-conspirator number 1, and I don't think anything will ever happen to him because of that.
You're right.
Okay. Secondly, this is sort of what we're trying to figure out. I mean, it can't just be bad for Donald. We can't, one of the maybe unintended consequences of having mostly Republicans testifying is that we're helping the Republican Party sort of sanitize itself. And look at how many people are calling these fucking Republicans heroes. No,
that's country before party. That's the Democrats trying to exercise something the Republicans won't do, putting their country before the party.
It's backfiring in the sense that we're where we are because of this fucking Republican Party.
Yeah,
we can't let them then. Oh, Kurt, awesome. Hi, Kurt. Welcome back.
Hey.
We're basically you're here at the perfect time. My head is about to explode, and a lot of us are about to shoot up heroin. Like, that's kind of where we're at.
I'm just going to be edibles, baby.
So no heroin, but my head is about to explode because Charlotte, and I'm not faulting the committee for this. It may just be an inevitable consequence of how they need to go about this, but it is a huge concern. Donald's the bad guy. These Republicans who are testifying, even Mike fucking Pence, who's not testifying, they're the heroes. Whereas Donald did what he did because he was allowed to by an entire party from Mitch McConnell on down. What do we do?
Here's what I really worry about right now. And I hate to be a Debbie Downer. I really do, because I think that a lot of the testimony today was very compelling. It'll be very useful in mass communications in the midterms. What I worry about, though, is that if I'm an advisor to Ron DeSantis, I'm telling him he needs to reach out to Trump immediately, promise to grant any pardons he wants, promise to pay off all his debts through Koch or whoever the hell, and then also promise a House resolution to expunge or whatever the hell it should be. Just tell him what you have to tell him to like remove the impeachment records or whatever. Basically, remake his reputation and let him retire in happiness if he throws his support behind DeSantis. That's what I'm worried about right now, after seeing all of that. And I know that it is incredibly, chicken little, the sky is falling, but it's hard not to see DeSantis using this to his advantage after this testimony we've seen today.
Why did I ask you? Oh my God.
Sorry. I know.
No, because you know what? That's although Kurt, welcome. Lots to catch up on, but let's stay there for a second, because Jen said this a long time ago and I kept meaning to bring it back up. And I kept not, and I think it's because I don't want to, I think I don't want to grapple with what Charlotte just said, because if things played out the way they normally would, Donald would absolutely be our secret weapon against any Republican seeking to replace him, because his ego is such that he would rather, and we've seen this time after time, he threatened to run as an independent if the Republicans didn't, stop complaining about his violent insurrection. And guess what? They all stopped complaining about his violent insurrection. The only hope I have, Kurt, is that his ego is also such that the idea of doing anything to help somebody else gain more power than he has is unthinkable, right? I mean, hopefully.
I've watched all this, and I've watched, how Trump has reacted to it, how he started shooting at Kevin McCarthy. Mm-hmm. And there is a part of me that wonders now if this makes the possibility that he actually tries to make himself the Speaker of the House, if that becomes much more viable with this all playing out. This is all happening in Congress. He is thirsty for a perch, thirsty for a power of position. Mm-hmm. And whether or not he ends up running for president, whether he can, all that, who cares right now? It's mm-hmm. more about an immediate present. Does this make it, in his mind, more likely? Listen, the Speaker of the House does not have to be a member of the House of Representatives.
Sadly,
anybody can be. I think that Kevin McCarthy, I've said this for a long time, he'll never be Speaker of the House for a myriad of reasons.
Right, no way.
How he has played the January 6th committee is just kind of that nail in the coffin, I suspect. But I absolutely think that this whole thing and how it's played out makes it much more likely that Donald will angle for something like that, because it would then put him in a very unique position going forward. It would allow him to take control of all the congressional committees that want to investigate Hunter Biden, for example. Mm-hmm. It would be another wrecking ball. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's a part of him that just lusts for that type of chaos.
Yeah.
And by the way, he has an easy out here. Just really quickly, Trump has an easy out here. He can always say that his health is preventing mm-hmm. him from running for president again.
He's already set that up. That's
that's all he has to do. And then not only that, DeSantis can say, we want to make the entire 2024 convention about your legacy. We're going to celebrate you the entire weekend. We're going to make you the greatest president of all time.
There's no way with
they might though. They might in exchange for him throwing the support.
I've interviewed DeSantis. DeSantis doesn't give a flying fickle finger of fate about Donald Trump and won't lift a fickle finger of fate to help him.
I don't know.
Ron DeSantis is all about Ron DeSantis. So
for the right price, he'll do it. For the right price.
No, I think at the end of the day, if because of these hearings, my point earlier about Biggs and Gates and my main man Mo Brooks is these people are now going to be poisoned, even in the halls of Congress. And this is a type of poison and cancer that they started that spreads and won't go away easily. It's a stain that won't go away easily. So DeSantis, there will be too much of a downside politically. DeSantis, while he could get the Republican nomination, maybe right now he couldn't, but if he does, he's still got to convince Democratic voters, because guess what, folks? Democratic voters still are the majority in this country. And he's not going to have that crossover play if he bows down and kisses Donald Trump's ass. And I got news for you. Nobody wants to bend down and kiss his ass unless it's beneficial to them. That's exactly why you saw Mitch McConnell do it, because that helped them get those people on the Supreme Court that they've been angling for years.
That's why you saw Rusty Bowers say yesterday that he would vote for Trump again.
Yes,
it costs him nothing to say that. He knows he won't have to support Trump again, but he's not going to piss off.
Well, and some of that you have to wonder if he said that so people wouldn't storm his Bastille and call him a pedophile and beat the crap out of him.
Exactly.
I mean, I don't think anything he says undoes his testimony. But John, I mean,
not at all.
Part of what this reminds me of, and I'm not really sure. I mean, what's his name? Ron DeSantis is as narcissistic as Donald, slightly less
smarter,
pathological. But but I don't know where he draws the line. But part of me wonders, why can't we just pay off Mansion and Cinema to get them to do what we want them to do?
That's my whole plan. It's called Bribe Back Better, because I think
we had that conversation a long time ago. Exactly. Bribe back better.
Do a better job than lobbyists at buying and paying for our elected representatives. Bribe back better really could work. The fact is, it's a cult of selfishness, which means sooner or later, all these selfish people who band together in self-interest with other selfish people for their own self-advancement, at some point, they'll always turn on each other. It will happen. And I'm not popping my popcorn until Rudy and Trump turn on each other personally. But they will shed Trump like a snake sheds its skin, and they'll move on to
as Barr did.
And DeSantis, yes, but Barr kept the door open and said he'd vote for Trump again as well.
Of course.
Will not suck up to Trump. He doesn't need to. He's going to get all those fake Christian voters, all the people out there who really think Jesus gives a shit about hating immigrants and putting women in jail for abortions and not liking trans children. All those charming true believers.
While they're all toting guns.
DeSantis is going to have them no matter what. And by the way, once DeSantis gets the White House, being the doughy mediocrity that he is, he's going to screw it all up, just like Bush and Cheney did. This is the cycle of my lifetime. Democrats have only achieved the Oval Office after Republicans have completely cocked everything up. That's the only America I've known. The two times the American people picked Democrats when things were going well was when the Electoral College said no. The American people picked Al Gore and Hillary Clinton, but the dead slave voters said, no, you can't have them. Republicans have to destroy things before a Democrat can be elected. This is the cycle. And again, with these hearings, and then with Joe Biden forgiving half the student loan debt in this country this fall, and with the Supreme Court destroying women's reproductive rights, I hate
and every other right, basically.
If that's not enough to get folks out to vote this November, then who do we have to blame for all this malfeasance?
Then what is the point? But again, though, Jen, we can come out and in numbers. Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton won by 3 million. Joe Biden won by 8 million. I think Joe Biden's Electoral College margin was smaller than. Between him and Donald, it was smaller than the Electoral College margin, not the margin of the Electoral College count, but the votes in those 3 states. So, I mean, he came like 44,000 votes away from losing an election. He won by 8 million votes. So we do come out. And what worries me, one, we are running out of time. We have never been in a situation because, this is happening globally. Autocracy is on the rise. Autocracy has never been on the rise in a situation in which America is also an autocracy. That's game changing in my view.
Some people thought that it was during the World War II era and that it was our wonderful president who couldn't get elected today because he was crippled. Franklin D. Roosevelt was an autocrat, and that there was that criticism of him during that fascist era.
Listen,
I don't disagree with you. I'm just saying that it has been said before.
Yes, and this American South was a closed fascist state during World War II. I get it, but there's a difference between in how things are, how things play out. Like America would be a full-on autocracy, fascist state, what have you. And you know, what's his name? Roosevelt wasn't making common cause with Hitler. He was trying to defeat him.
Yes.
I have something that might cheer you up, Mary.
Good luck.
Oh, well, you know,
gauntlet has been thrown.
I'm all ears, Jen.
We have autocratic movements on the rise. Colombia just elected their first socialist. Unions are on the rise. If someone like Chris Smalls can organize Amazon, people like him can organize voters. I mean, you know, and so the question is, you know, what is enough? I think there's so much momentum. I think, you know, there's this expression, ride the horse in the direction it's going. Whoever's organizing unions can organize voters. And we need to think about those ties and communities and figure out. And also the other thing I have to say is it's, you know, I know there's not losing. Right now we're focusing on not losing the Senate and the House. For 2024, the focus is, you know, when these are still similar, you know, it's Georgia, it's Michigan, it's Florida, it's, you know, it's Arizona. We know this. And so that's what, you know, we've got to really think about how I don't know who the we is, but, you know, it's not going to be the people in charge.
Just us.
By the way, what
the
makes
8
me
of
more
us.
angry than anything
The 8 of
else
us.
are these text messages I got like yesterday saying, look, you know, such and such happened at the Supreme Court. Please send us money. Well, fuck off. I'm not sending any money to I'm sorry, I am a, you know, Democrat, but I'm not sending it to the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee. I don't know why. I shouldn't be so hostile, but I want to send it to, I don't have that much money anymore, but I want to figure out how to direct it to get out the vote. And tell me why, who needs money in their race? Tell me why they need money. Because I'm not going to send money to some pot somewhere.
Well, that's what the Democracy Defense Fund is all about.
Only thing you want me to do.
That's a conversation. Yeah.
What? I'll send it to you, Mary. Mary,
Yeah, but no, not to me,
There
because
you
that.
go.
Please, let's
Not
not
to you,
let's
but
not
I've
get me in
sent it
trouble.
to your-
To the Democracy Defense Fund,
Gonna
because
set
that's
up a
what we're saying.
Patreon. Come on, Mary.
Right. No, we're looking at really key races, that Secretary of State races, flippable races, endangered incumbents. We're looking at every single race. It's to get money directly to candidates, to get money directly to organizations that are helping get out the vote, etc. Because it's overwhelming. But getting back to the idea of, well, let me start with this, George, this kind of feeling of cynicism. What is it going to take? Because listen, I know that 8 million is a relatively healthy margin, but Donald got 12 million more votes in 2020 than he did in 2016, which it makes me sick. And the Biden administration, I've said this ad nauseum, I apologize for repeating myself, but it gets treated by the media and by the Biden administration, I think in some ways, as a normal administration that followed another normal administration. And really all we have to worry about is inflation, gas prices. Nothing could be further from the truth.
Right.
So what is it going to take, George? I mean, all of our rights are being taken away from us by an illegitimate Supreme Court. And the Republican Party has basically, thanks in large part to Mitch McConnell, has committed crimes against this country that are unfathomable.
Okay, the short answer to your question, what is it going to take, is I don't know. Here's what I would like to see. Here's what would really sort of turn me on.
Yeah. Well, that's actually the question, because none of us knows. So, but yeah,
right. What would turn me on?
Would you like to see? Yeah.
I think we have a talent problem. We need some better talent on the bench. I need some. What is it? I haven't watched Drag Race in forever, but isn't it like charisma, uniqueness, nerve, and talent? We need a little more charisma, uniqueness, nerve, and talent on the bench, on the Democrats. And also, it's disheartening, to have a team on the Democratic side that seems so often to be so impotent. You know, like if you don't respond to this subpoena, then we're just going to get mad. Like, excuse me? And it just makes blowing off a subpoena or a request to show up for something like it's okay. That's, you know, one example of many one can get into, but it feels like, yes, we've got the White House and we've got this like barely existent margin in the House and Senate. But at the same time, I feel it's hard to feel optimistic or enthusiastic. And I feel like I want something to get enthusiastic or happy about. Do we sell voting like, you know, from a purely a marketing standpoint? Do we sell election day and voting like just like it's a hot thing to do? Like this is what the cool people do.
Yeah.
You know, and sort of is the Democratic Party. This is where the cool kids are. I don't know how else to sell it. Like this is what the cool kids are doing. This is in your best
interest. Got to get turnout. When there's high turnout, Democrats win. When there's
make it hot. And also, the Democrats have always been, or at least from where I'm sitting, and someone could, you know, blow me away on this. Like, it's always about we, us, our, and the Republicans are so I, me, mine. Like, get off my lawn, don't touch my stuff. You know, who moved my cheese? What was the title of that book? But like, and that, like, is that who we are? Is that who we want to be?
Well, a lot of us are, unfortunately.
Right.
That's the entire struggle of this country. That's the struggle of the entire history of this country. It's always been we're all in this together versus me. Well, I want what I want, and I want it now. That's why we have poverty. That's why we have privately funded elections. That's why lunatics are able to not have to reload inconveniently mid-massacre. It's all about the cult of selfishness. And I'm afraid I do have to go because we're getting ready for the Sirius XM show tonight.
I have to go too soon.
I want to thank you for having me on these. I have enjoyed these so much, and I have learned so much from your panels. I mean, the takes I get from the people you assemble is every bit as valuable to me as the testimony itself. And I can't wait to come back in July and drag this entire thing down to my level once more. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I'll talk to you soon.
John, you're so great. He's so great.
He's awesome. He's so fucking
wow.
awesome.
Everybody here is fantastic. I'm learning so much too.
And I think that one of the frustrations here is it seems that certainly over the course of my lifetime, there have been more people who care about other people, who want more people to have the franchise, who want a better and more expensive social safety net, et cetera. And that mean, cruel, selfish, significant but minority of the country that Donald tapped right into because that's his jam.
Yeah.
Kurt has gotten, even though that's gotten smaller, the system is rigged in its favor. And that, I think, is one of the things that's so demoralizing because, you know, Joe Biden has dealt with the hand he was dealt unbelievably, in my view. Has he made mistakes? Sure. Who fucking doesn't? But like, what does Donald have to offer? What does DeSantis have to offer other than more cruelty? And yet the Democrats are the ones who don't offer anything. It is kind of maddening, no?
Well, and this is the thing. I don't believe that there is a magical slogan or even a marketing campaign that fixes this because, you know, it's so interesting being a former Republican. I can tell you, our side never worries about our side showing up to vote. We don't need a reason. We don't need.
But you also don't have to.
We don't need any of that. We show up and vote. Like Republicans always vote, and Democrats have to almost be, I feel like, coaxed into it or motivated to. And I'm like, you know, if you're not watching what's going on in the world right now, whether it's the January 6th committee hearings, whether it's the Supreme Court taking away our rights piece by piece, if that's not enough to get your ass off the couch to vote, there's nothing there's no slogan, no commercial, no magical thing that's going to change that. You know, ultimately, you always say in sports, like it comes down to who wants it more. And we have to make it a conscious decision as a society that we want a better world and we are going to show up and vote for it. And if it really takes all of this effort to convince someone to do the least amount thing possible. It is not hard to vote. You can vote by mail. You can, I mean, like, we have all these things available to us to let us know how to vote now in America. It's a lot easier today than it was before. It shouldn't take a Herculean effort to convince our side to show up. It shouldn't take a Herculean effort to convince anyone that our side's better for our country than the other guys who want to burn everything down. And that's what has me always pulling out my hair. Is this feeling that Democrats have to be coaxed into it and convinced, with to beg them and plead with them, please show up and vote and save our country for yourself. It's like, help me help you. The only thing I'm asking you to do is vote. And the Republicans don't have that problem structurally or organizationally. Their side shows up every time. There is never a drop off in Republican turnout in elections at all, but there always is on our side, and it drives me crazy, Mary.
I completely.
This is the shorter version of what Kurt just said. Republicans, who moved my cheese? Democrats, oh, I'm waiting for the camembert. Like, I'm not happy with the brie. I want the camembert, and like, until we get our camembert, we're not going to show up.
Okay, I think this is absolutely.
And I'm lactose intolerant. Why are you talking about cheese?
All right, she wants the Perrier Jouet Rosé Champagne. That's what Jen's holding out for before she votes. No, but seriously, I think this is absolutely worth digging into. We're out of time now. The only thing I'll say is a slight counter to that. It's not that I disagree entirely, though, is that it is demoralizing that we have to show up in such greater numbers to get to parity. And I think that that's a huge part of the problem. So, wow, what a day.
That's a good point.
What a week, what a month. And it's just going to keep coming. I'm actually quite relieved we have a couple of weeks off, because I think a lot of this stuff needs to settle. And, the media needs to do its part in disseminating all of this information.
Every Capitol Hill reporter needs to track down the seditious six and ask them about why they wanted pardons. That's what the media should spend the next 2-3 weeks doing.
Absolutely. So we're going to leave it there for now. I'm going to forget somebody, but Norm Ornstein. Well, I can just read your names. Kurt Bardella, George Hahn, Wajahat Ali, Jen Taub, Charlotte Clymer, Dahlia Lithwick, and a couple of other people I'm forgetting, but who were awesome.
John.
Oh, Jesus. John Fugelsang, who knows a lot about Jesus.
And Brian, you mentioned him. Right? Yeah.
So you guys, I'm right there with John. I learned so much from all of you, including him. He's being modest. He's a very smart man. I love the way that you all are coming at this from slightly different directions, but yet we're still pulling in the same direction. And even though it's tough to consider the bigger picture, I so value being able to share this with all of you. I hope you'll come back when the hearings resume, and thank you for everything you do. You keep me sane. I admire all of you so much. And until next time, please stay safe.
Back at you, Mary. Thank you for having all of us so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right.
Oh my, what a day. Thank you so much for hanging with Thank you so much for hanging out with us. I know it was a long one, but this stuff is vitally important, and I'm really grateful that you all were here. Thank you to all of my amazing, brilliant guests. I really couldn't do this without them. So again, we will start this up again when the hearings resume, hopefully mid-July. Because of the timing of the hearings, this basically was our show tonight. So the next time you will come back is Tuesday, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific, for the Mary Trump Show strategy session. That's at youtube.com/Politicon. And of course, next Thursday, we'll have our regular interview show, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific, also at youtube.com/Politicon. And while you're there, please follow Politicon, like the episode, and click the bell, because if you do that, you will be sure to be alerted every time a new video drops. And we're having more videos in addition to the hearings and the strategy sessions and the interview. I've got shorter videos coming out just as a way to kind of keep up with the insanity of news that we seem to be dealing with on an almost daily basis. And of course, you can listen to the show in podcast form at Apple Podcasts or anywhere you listen. Please give us a 5-star review, because it really does help other people find the show. And that is it for tonight. Thank you so much for being here and for all of your great comments. Have an amazing weekend. We will see you next Tuesday. In the meantime, please stay safe and be kind.
Thank you.